If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
104 Red Obelisk. A brilliant beam of red light shot to the night sky, the heavy dark cloud parting on its way, letting the obsidian valley be bathed in the starlight of the Milky Way for the first time in hundreds of years. This beam had for point of origin a massive tower of organic metal piercing from the largest volcano of the valley in which it had been constructed. The crimson-red lozenge loomed over hundreds of kilometers square like the piercing eyes of an evil overlord gazing down on his territory, and for a minority, this was the case. A devil controlling the world around him, bending matter and light to his will, a tyrant of metal that dictated all that should and shouldn't be. Once the beam emitted reached close to the border between space and the limit of the atmosphere, it suddenly froze, the very tip concentrating into a sphere. Then in a shower of crimson light equal to a small sun, it exploded from its hexagonal plates of light interlocking to one another. This hard light traveled at incredible speed in the sky, blocking the two suns, and all other astral bodies in its wake as it covered a third of Pandora, turning the world into total darkness with the sole light source the bioluminescence of the primeval forest, ancient plain, and massive coral reef. At the same time, the green obelisk within the Hallelujah Mountain shot a sphere of green light, the organic metal between smooth silvery surfaces pulsing to the rhythm of an unknown heartbeat, glowing brighter than ever. Simultaneously within the Cove of the Ancestors, the blue obelisk acted in this similar unusual way, its arctic blue light emitting a sphere of this color. Then all three obelisks show their light intensify to the point no matter where on the moon someone was, at least one of their light would be seen, and also the sky turning completely dark, plunging the moon in total darkness. The next instant all three obelisks turned off, their light disappearing before the millions observing the phenomena, then the sky reappearing all of a sudden as the shield dissipated into motes of light. It was followed 10 seconds later by each obelisk turned on again in synchronization, the losange on their upper part turning into miniature stars as they fired their respective colored beams again, this time with an intensity never seen before. The air around them thrummed with unknown energy as each beam exploded at the same height, creating the very same hard light from before that spread in rolling waves covering the entirety of Pandora in only a few seconds. The sky morphed into a sea of hexagons darker than any material known to mankind. The only noticeable factor was the pure white line between each of them, and then like a massive screen, it shifted, giving the sight of the sky back to all. Then like a screen being turned on, the sky shifted back to what it once was. The night sky, midday, dusk, and more that had been blacked out came back in their full majesty as the planetary shield became completely invisible, camouflaged into the background with only precise equipment could detect. Within this volcano from which the red beam was at the base of the red obelisk, a muscular human taller than most NA6 in highly advanced and sophisticated power armor. His helmet was off, showing his strained breathing and trickling with dark blood from ears, eyes, mouth, and nose as he slowly recovered his strength on one knee. Finally. Fucking finally. We did it. 14 years of work and so much effort finally bear fruit. It's an addictive feeling, Liam said with a large grin past the maniacal and far too wide for a human. All of his efforts, the blood, sweat, and tears poured into this singular goal, the horror he caused, the element extracted for hundreds of hours from his body, months carving the tech replicator, and the innumerable sacrifices he made. It felt great beyond words, the constant agony in his body a footnote in comparison. Relief flooded his being, all the fear that had been brewing in his mind evaporating at the sight of the red obelisk. The magnificent tower that he could feel like any of his body parts, the vein-like structures growing within beating to his pulse. The obelisks had been built and now the reasons for their creation had come into being. Each of the three was connected, creating a sort of perpetual motion machine with a positive feedback of energy thanks to intricate uses of the element, the ambient chinic and magnetism vortex products of the high concentration of Pandorium. This virtually infinite source of energy was used to power the planetary shield, a construct weaved of hard light, monitored magnetic field, and controlled gravity in the shape of a bubble close to Earth in size. From supernovas, meteorites, for all that was natural to attack, such as explosives orders of magnitude stronger than any fusion or matter-antimatter bomb, biological weapons, or space debris manually thrown at the moon. Nothing but the extreme force of the physical universe could hope to crack it open, but it wasn't only this. The shield had more function than protection against the outside. It could emulate the effects of stars on the moon's surface, giving light and energy to life on it in case a change of orbit is needed. But the shield and what it could do are but a fraction of what the hyper-advanced towers of living metal could do. Their equally important goal could be started for his ascension. "We will survive together, we will live and thrive," an entrancingly beautiful white-haired NA6 said, lovingly placing herself against his armored back, her clawed hands moving as she helped him stand up while she gazed worryingly at his form. "Yes, we will. We will forever and ever. Nothing will separate us, for we are one, the post-human said softly, accepting his mate Avatar's help. He was exhausted beyond the limit of his genetically engineered body, but contradictorily he also felt the exact opposite, his being pulsating with energy, his blood no more in its almost entirety. Calling him human with only his physiognomy would be a very wrong assumption. This was due to one of the many sacrifices he had made and by his very biology. The element had accelerated the process of his body transformation by hundreds of times, forever altering him, but it was better than many dark futures. His alienation from what he once was evidently expended far more than his mortal shell. Still, he had kept as much as he could, his adoption of Miles, his friendship with Grace and Jake, the irreplaceable of what made him have consciousness and connection to mortals. These relations were true, he didn't fake them or lie in his sentiments to them, but they were not irrational, they held purposes born out of a need for self-preservation, out of the fear of walking too deep into the rabbit hole. This was more applicable to Miles than all others. What made him human might be gone, but he kept what was necessary to not turn into a monster. One by his standard, that is, and that would make already one by others with far less meaningful opinion, for they were far less intelligent. Iwa could not stop this phenomenon, neither did he want her to, and neither did she, and neither could she even do so if both desired it. It was inevitable, immutable. You can't be what you aren't on such a fundamental level, and so is something beyond inhuman. He couldn't play the human because he simply wasn't one anymore, and didn't delude himself in thinking so. Liam, thank you. Oh my Iwa, what the fuck is happening to your eye? Are ya alright? How are you alive? The panicked voice of Grace reached his ear and he stood up to his full height, looking down at her state of disarray. There was little to no crowd this time, and Grace was of course part of it. It wasn't the place for such an event, adding to it the local NA6 population's current state or lack thereof. The cemetery of Crystal status 700 meters away was not considerable in the equation. Hey! It's not organic anymore. How peculiar, I barely feel any difference. The qualitative change has not yet taken effect. Liam mumbled his little analysis, looking at his face from the perspective of a drone. The cracks on his skin had grown beyond what it once was, a third of his face was gone, and half of his hair had turned into 1,000 flowing blue tendrils, and his left eye was now a burning constellation of silver with the ghost feature of an iris. Yes and no, but you can consider it as yes. I won't permanently die due to this bodily situation. You don't have to worry, he said, trying rather badly to reassure the xenobotanist. The heck you mean by dying permanently? This isn't a video game where you fucking respawn. And why are you so happy? Grace cried out, her worry clear. Merely the hand of Tsute on her shoulder hushed her down. I do not understand what this video game is, but I agree with Dr. Augustine, if not as engaged, my friend. For us, a great portion of your head is missing. Now ever shifting modes of light. You are dying, that is clear to us, this ailment. Why does it seem to harm you yet it doesn't bother you? Akwe, the aged Oloitan of the Olangi, explained with calm. Unlike Liam or Iwa, their mind couldn't comprehend this form of his, and as such their mind simplified it or completely ignored it, leading to a strange and probably horrifying sight, adding the blood pouring from his orifices and his very sickly tone with baggy eyes and everything else. He didn't look healthy, and that would be a correct assumption. Though ultimately they were calm thanks to Iwa, hysteria was unwanted and a waste of time, so she created an effect of global serenity for all that were sensible to Shinnok, NA6, and Avatar. It wasn't to stop all emotions, however, and outbursts to a lesser degree were very possible, but it helped immensely, for what was before them was so far out of any norm though possible. You do not have to worry, trust me. With the green, blue, and red obelisks, no one has to worry, even less so for me. The sentiment is appreciated and acknowledged but unneeded, the post-human added with a wide smile, his left gauntlet disappearing to show his hand and specimen implant, roots and sinews of blue and purple energy mixed with his vein, while flesh, skin, and bone were in majority of this same light that was his hair. His hand was half gone diagonally from pinky to the index, the tech gauntlet the only way for him to interact physically. He was a ghost possessing plate armor. And it was the same case for his left foot and most of this half of his body. The tech armor was the only reason he wasn't bedridden or in a wheelchair. Dying would be correct to what I'm living through, but only partially. Passing, a transition, a rebirth. All these words and their synonyms would be more apartment. He pressed further on the tech gauntlet, getting back on. And you're not the only ones that will worry. Better now than later, Liam thought. Microseconds before the sound of air folding echoed, the sound of the tech teleporter being activated echoed. Miles and Kiri had arrived from Hell's Gate after having pestered Kulpa for hours. Of course, Liam knew this from the start. Their arrival wasn't a surprise, it was he who gave the go-to for the cybernetic alien otter to teleport them here. And so Liam's eyes shifted to an athletic 13-year-old teenage boy taller than most adult human males running in his direction with all his trained body, all the while screaming in horror, shock, fear, and despair with one single word as he had his eyes locked on him. Dad! At such a sight Liam crouched down, for otherwise he would be far too tall. Then with his arms spread wide open he formed a soft hard light shield above the tech armor to avoid injury and grabbed the cannonball of a boy in an all-encompassing hug. Dad, what is happening to you? Are you dying? Please don't leave me. I do don't. Don't leave me. I don't want to be alone, the boy began to mumble incoherently between tears, hiccuping, and shaking voice, his panic rising without visible limit. I'm not going to, Miles. I will not disappear and neither will I die. I'm beyond this physical limit, Liam said reassuringly, ruffling the boy's hair softly and staring right into his eyes, Miles not even flinching or looking away from those inhuman eyes that looked at him with care and storge. But, you are bleeding. Posterior epistaxis, pulmonary hemorrhage, damaged lung, ruptured vein. And you are disappearing. You are dying, the boy tried to argue, his mind having a hard time comprehending what was said. This made Liam proud, for it was what he taught Miles, but logic needed context to be applicable. This was what was lacking here. Good observation, but inaccurate conclusions. What you are seeing. You can compare it to the metamorphosis you have studied, biology, or even puberty that you are going through. I must go through it, I cannot stop it. I will not abandon you even if the present me is to change, Liam said. The blood never stopped flowing while he stared into his adopted son's very soul. It wasn't a metaphor, he could feel it through a weak but growing extrasensory sense. Liam's eyes widened in horror, a burning hot stake of pain stabbed him in the liver from nowhere, and his concentration slipped, a lapse in the control of his body. The careful hold he had turned into a crushing vice for a fraction of a second, with enough force to crush the sturdiest hardwood tree trunks. At the exact same time, the hexagonal shield of Miles' tech belt flared to full power, fissuring and cracking in many places, but before it shattered the lapse in control ended. It happened so fast that only Liam and I comprehended what just happened, for the others it was just a flash of blue light with seemingly no meaning. I almost killed him. If I didn't make the belt, or it was in a building where he took it off. Or I had put more force behind it, or had my full strength, the post-human thought, mortified, ending the hug and standing up as naturally as possible. One wrong move and someone would die by his hand. But there was something both more horrific and an incredible miracle by all standards. If he had killed Miles, crushed the boy's cranium, ribcage, and spine like a ripe grape with no hope of healing him back together, it wouldn't have been the end. Liam wouldn't have accepted it. Grace held little understanding of how erroneous her words about respawning were, and how death was nothing but a parameter for Liam to fiddle with. 105 Return of the RDA. 20 ISV Venture Star could be seen in the process of decelerating. The antimatter engines making this change in speed from 70% of the speed of light were working at full power, leading to a spectacle a fraction of humanity had seen in person. A spectacle that was of beauty beyond words, as the engines shined for light years away, forming a trail of kaleidoscopic light of organized color in the form of a trailing shining nebula. Within the confine of the ISV Venture Star, at the head of this fleet, the interstellar vehicle Manifest Destiny, a dozen doctors and technicians specialized in cryo-hibernation could be seen, accompanied by small white drones as they effortlessly moved in the cryogenic compartment of the spaceship. "Johnny, look at her face, this would go wild on the net with her prestige," one of the technicians said, pointing a finger at the small middle-aged woman at the head of the Joint Expeditionary Task Force still in hibernation. "Shut the fuck up, Melee, you know we are constantly monitored by the main AI. General Ardmore won't punish you, but don't hope for pleasant missions in the future when we land on this moon, because she won't forget and tell it to our superior. Little twat like you need to be educated," Bob said with exasperation to his younger colleague of the fairer sex. "You're freaking boring. It's just a selfie, I don't see the harm in that. At worst it's viewed by billions, it's not like someone of her status would be affected by a funny picture," she mumbled in disappointment with faux anger, her focus half on him and half on the task at hand as she fiddled with the command. Many graphs passed before her eyes, from glycemia to average neuronal activity after an anti-freezing solution injection that stopped ice crystals from forming in cells. They didn't want frozen meat after all. Being freaking boring is better than being sent to work as an engineer on a mine, or a field medic. Trust me. I very much prefer staying warm in a building than anywhere else in the wild of this hellhole of a moon, Johnny said, emphasizing his words by clicking the metallic finger of his left arm prosthesis and showing various scars from his past as a young adventurous man who thought being a mercenary was a good idea. "I don't see any problem here," That's just cool as hell, man. I would gladly lose an arm for this kind of high-end augment. Don't lie to me, this arm isn't just to replace your lost limb, she said, her blue eyes feasting on the metal arm. Then be a good girl and don't try to fuck with your superior, specifically not a 4-star general. If you heed my words, then, maybe back on Earth you can have the connection to get one or anything of the like, he grumbled out with an exhausted sigh at the youngest overexcitement and stupidity, smart enough to get here but not much else it seemed. Aye, Captain, she responded in a cheerful tone that made him want to punch her in the nose. At least she was good company, if a rather annoying one, but that was better than most. They continued their banter back and forth as more of their colleagues joined, and together they continued the tedious awakening protocol for a good 2 hours until the 176 members that were in hibernation had been awakened and checked up for any injuries that might have been caused by the machine. One of the last that had awakened from hibernation was Parker Selfridge, the 7 years that had passed from Earth to here but the blink of an eye, like a dreamless sleep, and so all that had been said before embarking was clear in his mind. Do not fail the company, again. The implications were clear and promised a very unpleasant future, if a future at all. His connection and resources were less than a speck of dust compared to a company worth more than $1 quadrillion and powerful enough to destroy countries by the sheer scale of their ranges in all types of productions. Though he didn't have the time to idle on this, he was showered, cleaned, and put in good clothes before being accompanied to the control room by the duo of ever-chatting doctor and technician, closing the door behind as the duo walked away. The Sleeping Beauty is awake, we can begin this impromptu meeting. A blunder will not be acceptable this time, a man taller than him in a navy blue 3-piece suit said with jest. This was Charles Stringer, the new head administrator of the Resource Development Administrator for Pandora, and Selfridge's new boss, for as of now he could be considered his secretary. A large downgrade from what he once was, but a second chance was a second chance. He wasn't going to spit on it, he was pissed off on the inside nonetheless. Which showed ever so slightly his expression, something that amused Charles. Boys, this isn't the time for this. If you want to fight, do it later, Frances Ardmore said to them both in a measured but strict tone. The fact one was technically her superior mattered little, she had her fair share of these people her entire life, and that never stopped her. My apology for this unpleasant sight, Charles was the first to respond as he fixed his tie and began speaking about the subject at hand. I don't think explaining the goals why we are here in detail is a necessity. Take back Hell's Gate, colonize the moon and restart exploitation. What must be mentioned, however? An image would better illustrate than my word. At this, a holographic 3D image of Pandora manifested in front of them. On it several points of interest were marked, notably Hell's Gate, the supposed location of the native clans, an exploitable area. The atmosphere turned incredibly heavy as there was more, and it wasn't the good kind. Marked above 3 of the largest, purest, and most concentrated deposit of unobtainium that they had previously located was 3.1 green for the forest where Quaritch died, 1 blue far in the sea and 1 red in an active volcanic plain. What are those? Frances asked more to herself than others as she took control of the hologram and zoomed into the green dot, and a satellite image taken from one of the ISV Venture Star telescopes greeted them. Charles did not react because he was awake before them and had the time to calm down, not that he would have had a panic attack. None here would act this way, it would be uncouth, at least for him and the general, for the notion of a third party involved was a very likely hypothesis that just become a reality. That is, unless the NA6 played the weak caveman for giggles and were in fact a hyper-advanced civilization with never-seen technology, which didn't make sense. Supposed tree goddess or not? Several images appeared from the green dot, from various angles, and all showed a floating tower of metal emitting a green beam toward the sky. Its design was alien, pulsing blue veins resting within its strange shape while a green lozenge stood at the head like an eye. Alien, Selfridge mumbled rather calmly, surprising Charles. You aren't the only one Mr. Leroy spoke to about this. And it changes how we should proceed. We can't go and hope everyone will fold because the Solar Unity Law said so. Diplomacy will be of order, and politics too. Frances almost spat the last words, a facet of reality she despised for many reasons, but the one at the top was the amount of good men and women that were killed for stupid and selfish order beyond her control when she was younger, and that was only the tip of the iceberg. This is very bad news. Whatever build this has technology at the very least equal to ours and must know we are here. Charles muttered the obvious, which prompted others to speak. It's the silver-eyed thing Grace had entered in contact with, and why I lost control of everything. Selfridge with certainty and obvious anger all over his features. It was this individual the reason behind it all. Well, partly, but that mattered little at the end. Or one of its kind. We don't know anything about its species, their number, range, culture, way of thinking, or technology level. It might be a lone one or it might be one in a billion. But first those 3 towers. What is their purpose? Motherboard, any inklinging with the data available. The general analyzed all points and asked a question to the ship AI, something she wasn't new to. ACE were omnipresent in the military and everyday life, some even more advanced than this one. Level clearance high enough, query accepted General Francis Ardmore. A smooth robotic androgynous voice responded, then various data sheets came to be from the few reading glimpses from those alien towers. Technology being far more advanced than the 21st century gave ways to learn a lot from seemingly minuscule samples, a powerful computer behind only aiding in the matter. Answer to query, reading of these alien structure revealed contradictory data, never recorded unprecedented level of unknown energy flowing through an unknown material of metallic characteristics defying all known material and alloy. There was a 3-second pause for all to the motherboard continued in this same emotionless even voice. Their purpose remains a mystery, but it has been calculated that their goal was at high percentage chance related to defense and attack. That doesn't advance us much, that's the obvious. Those things aren't made to be only pretty, she sighed, massaging her brows, her mind going on to several simple scenarios on how that could come to be. All required a large degree of pacifism. As much a fight with an alien was an exciting prospect, she knew the saying fuck around and find out, and was far less excited to know what it could lead to. 3 several kilometer high towers heavier than entire skyscrapers held floating with enough energy to destroy countries if not more flowed through. Those things were hundreds of the most powerful nukes ever created, individually making it worse and more terrifying to just imagine. Hey! I'm scared. How intriguing, Francis thought with amusement. She was the only one who realized how dangerous this unknown was and was damn sure going to do her best against the worst possible outcome. Jake's little rebellion and the loss of Pandora were insignificant compared to the possibility of a more advanced civilization of unknown motives existing beyond their sight and understanding. At least there was only the RDA and no other enterprise or country, since it would likely start a war in scale she barely could fathom for X and Y reasons that would be pretty much born of self-interest and foolishness. History doesn't repeat, it rhymes, and with aliens, it would simply be a different tune. The NA6, while interesting, were pretty unimportant for the RDA aside from being used in the forms of virtue signaling to appear good to the masses. They even had a kid show and the like on their streaming platform. But a fellow spacefaring species. This was an entirely different story. There was no middle ground, either a bright future for humanity, a horrible long war, or extinction of the human race with a pinch of torture and slavery and the like. Understandably, she very much wanted the first option. They weren't even safe in space, and she was beyond her knowledge correct. Their little conversation was currently in the middle of being listened to in real time like an unfiltered reality show. What could the motherboard even hope to fend off, nevertheless notice a cybernetic attack from technology beyond its creator's understanding? The NA6 were closer to making AI like motherboard than the RDA to the thing that was hacking their entire fleet the moment they entered the binary star system. It was unfair, truly, but it wasn't a game with rules, and fairness held no importance. I feel conflicted, I don't know if I should cry or laugh. This is both funny, sad, and infuriating. To think I had many sleepless nights and nightmares for when they will come back, Grace said with pursed lips before continuing to drink her pumpkin milkshake from the titanium straw. The much smaller figure of Norm to her left said, sounding rather hopeful, they seem to understand the problem and will go the reasonable route. It's surprising but good. They don't have raving lunatics as leaders, so it does help, but I wouldn't go saying they are reasonable. They are scared of what I probably have and don't want to fuck around and find out. They are just smart enough to realize this much, Liam corrected, his voice now echoey and distinctively metallic yet also human-like. He then flicked a finger that changed the live video from the flagship's command room, showing information on who was who in the greatest of detail right from the main AI Pandora hard drive. It sure does. This woman in particular, I have worked under her, she is a legend in her own right. It's good she is here, she is a woman of logic and iron will, and here it's in our favor. However, if technology were equal or lower, Jake decided to chime in, he was quite relaxed overall. The fact none of his loved ones were in danger thanks to Liam was the main factor, and that monstrous acts were made for this was well worth it. It was them and them first, cold, but that was life. Something that put his family in danger needed to be terminated. That's why there is nothing equal. I don't like being on an even playing field. They lost the moment they passed the outer asteroid belt. Right now it's like stealing the candy of a tetraplegic, blind, and deaf, mentally retarded child with cancer. Their life support system can be turned off at my will, for example, Liam said coolly, a smile from little remains of his organic feature formed behind his tech helmet. But I don't want to do that and I won't. An understanding should be able to be made. Is this correct, my love? He added. Killing innocents was something he preferred not to do, particularly when 60% of the passengers were those innocent. Yes, but if it pleases them or not, that is a different story. We are the superior force in this scenario and we will act as such, Iwa with her head on his armored shoulder said dreamily, fully trusting her mate's decision. 106 First exchange of words. Year 14 Day 10, January 30th of the year 2168. It had been close to 14 years since the RDA had left, evicted from Pandora by force. Their coming was inevitable, and so for Liam, when the probes he dispatched far in outer space sent him back, the fleet of spaceships telegraphed toward Alpha Centauri, the binary star system. Pandora was part of the largest moon of Polyphemus. It came as no surprise with the timeline and their appearance that those 24 spaceships were of human design and from the awaited company. Their goal, evident even if it was an impossibility to achieve, was to gain control of Pandora. It was more of a dream than anything else as of now and forevermore. Liam had prepared for this moment since he learned where he had been transmigrated, and as such they were no threat even if they rammed on Pandora, hellbent on destroying everything with antimatter. Each of the ISV Venture Star had been thoroughly hacked before any humans had ever begun awakening. This led to him having full control of everything on board, such as information from the passengers' personal information, biometrics, and the like, to various blueprints of which he found some quite clever but ultimately flawed in their design. The Project Phoenix with the implantation of stored memories in those soul drives on NA6 human hybrid, brought, and more. One thing that interested him was the history of this Earth stored within the database, a fraction of it more acutely. Liam knew the major point from Grace and others, but having an up-to-date world map was both fascinating and disheartening. The thing that stood out the most was the color of the seas and oceans, now a murky grey. The almost total disappearance of ice on the north and south poles, with the fact that asteroids rich in water were constantly brought, led to the earlier bodies of water increasing and spreading on land, leading to the disappearance of many islands and even countries, with also the effect on country land bowed with coast deeper than they once were. Then the land itself, there was almost no green left. Most of the land were radioactive wastelands, but the worst offender of all were the Middle East and the anciently most populated area of Russia, now a glass desert. And that was just those two. The map showed the current geopolitical situation of the world. First, many countries simply didn't exist anymore, for their land was not livable or their populations were killed, but that was not how it was everywhere. The United States of America was no more. It was the product of a violent civil war after several wars that caused it. It had busted into several countries, the biggest of them all containing the states of the East aside from Florida and Texas, this nascent country having added a new to its anterior name. They still all were allied together and functioned pretty much as one entity, if a rather disorganized one. It remained the top power of North America behind Mexico. Canada still existed, but from what Liam saw was rather weak and unsuitable for life in its almost entirety, which wasn't much different than most countries. For the south it was Brazil, with Venezuela fighting for dominance, but not once did they get close to French Guiana and the surrounding territory, as it was part of another organization far more powerful militarily and economically speaking. There was no reason as well. If they wanted a primeval forest turned into a trash heap, they had plenty enough already. This led to the European Union, renamed the European Economic Community after World War III. It was still standing, with France and Germany being the two principal pillars, but with now the added one of Poland. There were new members and ones that were refused, such as Great Britain and Ireland, which was a full nation, who were accepted and rejected as evidence. The African continent, for what remained of it, was a death zone with little to no country or political structure of power any worth mentioning remaining standing. This continent was where most wars happened, but that wasn't all. The coup de grace was from one man, Dili Balagan, a businessman who by himself and a few friends led to the stripped mining of the continent, killing what little remained and stood in his path from his goal. He was currently aboard one of the RDA spaceships, his presence here apparently due to some spiritual awakening from his wrongful ways, which Liam found to be a very bad joke, but killing him by causing his pod to malfunction would be far too easy and gentle. Russia as it was didn't exist anymore, just like China, both much like the USA having shattered, but much unlike it they were eaten by the surrounding countries like India for the most part. Still, China was the only remaining one of moderate relevance. Ending on continental Asia, South Korea had conquered its northern brother, but Japan still stood strong with its main relevance, a powerful megacorporation focusing on cybernetic augmentation working right under the RDA. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say they were close second in power, but that mattered little. They were essentially a puppet. For Oceania, while many islands had sunk like New Zealand, the heart of it, Australia still stood even if it was now two separate political entities of opposite political views that were the same in essence. It cuts the massive island in two from the middle, one standing at the east and the other at the west. It was far more complex than this, with powerful city-states like Utopia and the colonies on Mars, the Moon, and in orbit of Earth, but that was essentially what Liam learned. To see that his country from his past life was still standing was pleasant, even if he held no loyalty or love for the one of this universe. He knew that he would have to work with this, but there was no fixing this situation the gentle way. From a purely logical point of view, there were far too many problems entangled, each more complex and deeply nuanced than the last, all fueled by emotion and self-interest from mortal beings with a tendency to be very, very stupid. The very few good seeds were also far too warped in their own ideology for a better society to exist, themselves filled with grudges. Nobody could fix this, and it was only on the views, beliefs, experiences, and the like of each group and individual within. The bigger problem as a whole was how civilization was built from its very first day and how it had evolved to the present, and it was neither good for the species nor the individuals. Or anything else for that matter. It was flawed because it had developed naturally, the strong eat the weak, but that couldn't work this way and be stable for a healthy society of sapient beings of a technologically advanced species. Only individual talent, skill, and competence should matter, which currently wasn't the case, at least not as close as some desperately believed. Another big problem was that humans couldn't rule themselves that much. Liam had seen again and again, it was dangerous though far too cliché for his taste. But it was the truth. Pattern recognition could be bad in many cases, but in others, it wasn't. Very, very, very few individuals could lead and act for the good of all. They were as rare as pink bipedal unicorns. NA6 were the same here, but they had Iwa, and he would have to be a version of her here. He would have to set rules and guide them like the children they were, while giving them the right environment to do so. Like pets, work animals, or even livestock, some would say, and that would be correct. But does it really change what they are, to begin with? Trained from their youngest day to live and work in society till their death, giving them the best time possible while maximizing their potential is but the most correct and logical things to do. Liam, though completely self-aware of his arrogant self-centered read, this added with the monstrous implication behind it all and a pinch of a god complex. Or he could simply let them rot and live as is, but his budding instincts from his changing self were vehemently against this. And to begin with, he was against it himself. That would truly make him a monster and no better than the ones he despised. To add to this, manpower would be needed for the future war against the harvesters. He and Iwa would be far stronger, but not omnipotent, quite far from it in fact, and a minimum multi-star system Type 2 civilization with the power to make wormholes likely it would always be an extinction-level threat. Liam? Iwa, to you, are you here? The voice of Grace snapped him back to reality from his thoughts. He simply grunted in acknowledgement and she began speaking her mind. What should we do with the reincarnated soldier? Quaritch in particular. Yet. I have been thinking the same. It's just fucked up no matter the point of view, Jake added, quite unsure of how to feel about this. Can I? Edmund asked, and Liam simply noted for him to explain, which he did in the next instant. Technically speaking, these individuals are not those that died 14 years ago. The soul drive copied their memory and stored it into data. It didn't store their soul as the name implies, they are just vat-grown hybrids with memories of other people put in them. They didn't even have the memory of participating in the battle. Correct, but in the end they are unimportant variables, they are more of a living experience anyway from the RDA point of view. But if they act upon their implanted memory, then so be it. Their innocence goes only so far until elimination is required, Liam said, evenly applying an unbiased view on this situation. The recombinant, or recomb for short as they were called, were more victims of choice from the people to whom their memories are from than anything else. It's up to them to not be morons, which for their given knowledge would prove very hard. I don't like it, but I understand. It's just, you know. It's both aggravating and frustrating, that's all, the xenobotanist said, leaning toward Psute behind her. The only full NA6 present for him was the only available and stoic enough to be here. I understand too, but don't worry, this point won't stay the same. He died far too young and he merits that much, Liam said cryptically, and before Grace could truly process what he said, he added, let's open discussion, first at distances. Let's see how they react to a friendly greeting. At the same time, within the interstellar vehicle Manifest Destiny, several minutes had passed since the insightful yet useless information given by the ship's AI. Finishing her cup of black coffee, General Ardmore sighed in frustration. Her experienced eyes blocked onto this impasse, and she wasn't alone in that. I fear this will go nowhere without more information on these alien devices. We are wasting our time staring at empty space hoping an epiphany will befall us, Charles said with a thin frown. Our best bet right now is to send probes or try to make contact and avoid potential misunderstanding. The general gave out her cynic opinion on the matter, which both could only agree to. However, it wasn't them who responded. A wise decision indeed, Francis. Though I do need to advise you that any probes manufactured with the level of engineering on board would not reveal much of the purposes of my obelisks. A deep rumbling, distinctively male voice with an ethereal and echoing quality resonated in the room from every speakers at once. The effects were instantaneous. The first to panic was Parker Selfridge, whose already shaky figure worsened, his face turning a few shades paler while his head snapped around everywhere. His eyes immediately locked on one of the many screens that showed the same symbol, a lozenge with a pure white ball of energy in its middle with a background of light blue hexagons. His superior Charles had a similar reaction, but instead of staying silent, he yelled, both terrified and angry at the strange voice. "Who are you?" only to realize his mistake once he spoke those words, dread washing over him in the next instant and his heart powerfully hammered in his chest to the point he felt his sense of hearing dampen. As for the oldest of the three, her body instinctively moved to grab her handgun, her face hardened, but she stood overall calm. In fact, she didn't seem surprised. "Boys, we are fucked. The worst case scenario has happened, calm down and stay polite or I will make you eat lead," she said, placing her weapon back in its holster before taking another sip of her coffee, her hand trembling slightly. Her words didn't help either full-grown man from calming down, but Charles was not panicking as rationality came back to him while Selfridge ran to the sealed-off door trying to open it with no success, the AI constantly refusing his request. Only with a slap from the general did he stop his hysterical fit. "The worst? If you deem it so, then so be it. Your opinions are as such for reasons. I'm Liam Cram, the one responsible for the company you held loyalty to have lost the conflict close to 14 Earth years ago. You can consider me the alien behind it all. I will not play silly in-game and be brutally honest in the conversation that will decide your life and death," the owner of the voice, now with a name, said. A smirk could be felt behind those words. But that wasn't all. The hologram of Pandora on the table fizzled out of existence to be replaced by a male human muscle-bound figure short of 3 meters, 9 feet 84, tall in full body armor of design utterly alien to them. This figure then walked down and gazed through its visor at all of them. "Let's begin," it said in this same voice that spoke the last times, the tone of a coldness close to unfeeling robots yet with clear arrogance showing it wasn't an inorganic being. 107 Proposal. "Let's begin." After those words, the translucent hologram hunched forward and grasped a cup that had fallen on the ground between its two comparatively massive fingers and placed it back on the table. It took a full second for the words to register in Charles, Parker, and Francis's minds and another to comprehend what they had seen. An immaterial light structure composed of photons had touched, affected, and lifted a solid object. This meant the hologram had the bare minimum that could affect its surroundings, and by extrapolation, they weren't safe from direct physical harm either, and that the one behind could make their technology do things that shouldn't be possible. Both were chilling realities. If the atmosphere was heavy before, then it was suffocating beyond equal now. All three were trained to various degrees, and death was not a foreign concept, one having faced it all her life, but these things can only take you so far. But facing an alien with technology so powerful it made them the caveman of the equation was something no preparation would have helped. They were the NA6 here, and that was a terrifyingly ironic situation. "My points will be direct. The primary goals of the RDA, and by extension yours, are unacceptable to me and my mate, and as such will never come to fruition in the way you desire, but," the hologram drawing out the "but" as another hologram of the symbol that had appeared on various holo screens manifested in 3D above the table, a lozenge of metal with a white energy sphere that crackled with power and repulsed all light. "But there is no reason for a fight to happen between our respective parties. First, you do not possess the might to make these objectives a reality, but I do not need to remind you why, do I? Second, I'm no bloodthirsty maniac or a cartoon villain. There is no reason to cause unwarranted and unneeded death or escalate this into an armed conflict," the hologram stated matter-of-factly but in a more amiable tone, both saying and playing down the threat he represented. "No, it is unnecessary, Sir Cram," General Ardmore said as calmly as her body let her do, her voice but a quiet and almost shaky whisper, just like when she was a young recruit still wet behind the ears. She understood at this instant what they were facing wasn't just an alien, it was far beyond this mere term. The word mate was also not random and didn't go unnoticed by her, it was either a friend or lover, and it hinted toward the potential of an entire civilization behind him. If he was the norm or even just a slightly rare case, then his entire civilization would be close to him, and that was an even more terrifying prospect than the present situation. If she knew the truth, she wouldn't know if it was worse or better. The same was true for primary goals, but it wasn't what was on her mind right now, and she needed a clear mind to understand all that was said. for what she was feeling. She didn't know how to explain it, and it would sound silly if not insane, but she felt she was facing a being so far above her in every aspect, both spiritually and physically. It was something she never felt before. Existential terror and primal dread would be the closest term to describe it. Even when meeting the CEO of the RDA, Marcus Leroy, a creature more machine than man. A monster in all definitions of the word, artificially maintained alive for nearly 2 centuries. He was the longest living human and arguably the most powerful. This creature under the oddly human name of Liam Cram was far more than the bastard of flesh and metal maintained on a life support that was Marcus. And what she felt wasn't only from the logical part of her mind, there was a presence, it was unmistakable and hard to describe, contracting many of her past experiences and beliefs. In any case, for all intent and purpose, Liam held everyone's lives and fate in his hand while they remained utterly powerless. He was like a god at this very moment. There was not much one could do against a successful cyber attack that had succeeded beyond doubt while in a facility working fully in that spectrum. The only options were suicide, self-sabotage, or surrender, sometimes the 3 to varying degrees, and each 2 of the first options were unacceptable and way out of proportion, leading to the last being the one that could be used. No matter how much she hated it, this was the best outcome possible. They weren't here for war to begin with, and going kamikaze was just a waste if they even could do that, to begin with, a show of how powerless they currently were. Liam could depressurize this room and they will all die without hope of escape. He was their enemy still, but luckily not one wanted their death or who was aggressive or hateful. He, while obnoxiously arrogant, seemed quite reasonable, very friendly and casual for the current situation that is. Almost too much, in fact, to the point she began thinking he was more entertaining himself than anything else. Well, if he wasn't just tricking them, which was also a possibility, but there wasn't any reason she could see with the current skewered power dynamic why he would ever need to do so aside from personal hubris. But it was an alien, so all was possible. This is infuriating but good, I suppose. It's good we are amusing to him. We don't have any alternatives, but hope he doesn't decide to switch his opinion on this, the general thought grimly, but she didn't regret coming here, not one bit. This was beyond exciting and made her feel young again. Indeed it isn't. You are smart and self-aware enough to understand your situation and the consequences of trying to play smart against a much greater force. At least this is what I hope from you. But as I said, I will not kill without reason. You are far more useful alive than dead. I do not want a slaughter to happen, even less so one composed of innocent people. I have come directly to propose the creation of an agreement between our parties, for these very same individuals have no play to have in this potential scuffle. The hologram said as a holographic chair of pure liquid silver manifested behind the humanoid hologram. What type of agreement, its rules, and the price for us to pay? Charles, back on track to his businessman persona, asked, straight to the point and clear in his words as the 2 others were used to. Simple. Your complete and utter compliance to my words, for your right to not be filtered out and sent back from where you are from. Might make right, as one would say, no hard feeling, but our interests do not align, and for you to have any option you must adapt them to mine, which I mentioned, the hologram said, casually tapping his finger upon the chair of silver light, the sound of metal clicking against metal echoing heavily in the room. None could truly process what was told before the hologram spoke again, his tone colder than before but still mildly entertained, as if the topic at hand was more of an interesting fun fact worth a few seconds of attention than their lives, ambitions, and futures. And in a way, for the creature behind this construct of light, it was the case. The worst was that there was no enmity or hate behind the voice, but simple superiority, an infuriating but very true one. Of course, this is not an immediate decision for you to take. Only 1,069 of the fleet's 4,205 total passengers have awakened as of yet. This concerns them and the ones still in hibernation, as well, more than you in fact, but I do not want an insurrection of hysteria, and neither do you. It would be counterproductive. I will give you the time necessary to ponder upon my offer for us to proceed further in our diplomacy. With that said, I bid you adieu until next time. May your choice be the correct one, the hologram said ominously and disappeared into flakes of light while all screens were back on as if nothing had happened. Motherboard back online. The AI said, but its flat voice raised the interest of none present. Fuck, 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 Charles suddenly screamed, punching the table repeatedly to the point blood began to flow, but he didn't care. He wasn't scared for his life but furious at the situation itself. Charles, calm down, Frances said with a slight rise of her voice, grabbing the man-child's hand harshly with no difficulty despite her age, smaller figure, sex, natural biological disadvantages, and the lack of exercise for years with the cryogenic hibernation. Not all was organic inside or even natural, simple as that. Soldiers of her caliber in those days and age have certain advantages, adding that she had been a volunteer for less than ethical or finished experiments. Nothing that made her superhuman, but enough to make her far stronger than her appearance would suggest. But in the end, it wasn't a lot, it was just that Charles wasn't exactly the fittest person on board. She could have done more like the 500 augments, but it came at a cost she wasn't willing to pay. This is not an unplanned possibility. We knew of an alien presence and that they were likely apt at cyber warfare. We have a window of work here, it's not much, but it's either that or we leave, and whatever has entered the vessel will be given back on Earth. She continued, walking toward a first aid kit and using the device to fix the damage done. You are right, my excuse for my outburst. And then there are the civilians. Your soldiers will obey, they are built for that, but the others. They won't simply comply and be calm with our current less than desirable standing, Charles said, massaging his hands while wincing in pain slightly. That's going to be the hard part. But we have time on our hands. The message would have to be spread in the correct ways and we must make sure it's us, Selfridge said, having calmed down from his earlier panic attack and on the same page as them. Million of kilometers away, within the con-mod of Hell's Gate on Pandora, Liam turned off the hollow screen and before looking at the small crowd spoke about just what unfolded. That was highly entertaining to watch, Grace said with a hearty chuckle, something she never thought she would have for such an important situation. It sure was. The fact nobody is at risk of dying without a massive fuck-up is why we can be amused. Thoughts. The privileges to be on the powerful side, Catherine said while her mind as the leader of the various mining operations was more focused on what this influx of people would change for her and her team, since it would massively increase her workforce. Then the mood turned for the worst as in front of them all Liam began to cough loudly and grasp his chest. They stood still, frozen, only the white-haired NA6 at his side moved. She grasped his helmet in both of her clawed hands and placed her forehead against his visor while chanting a soft and entrancing tune only she and him could hear. My love, Iwa spoke through their shared chinook link, his pain beyond agony so vibrant she could feel it as well. It was potent for most of the time, but this one was particularly violent. I'm fine. I just need a fuck. I need to sit down. It will happen soon, I can't hold for long, he answered back, barely able to walk straight as she helped him toward the exit, none needing to be informed as to what was happening. You are dismissed, he said with a small stutter as a sharp spike of pain stabbed him in the heart, his voice having gained an ever more echoey nature, making it reach the entire room from all directions at once. And that is what everyone did once the All-Father had walked out, his state miserable and for anyone not in the known dying. Still, his explanation didn't quench the fear brought by his current state. His ailment is getting worse and worse as days and weeks go by, Tsute said in NA6 with genuine worry for his friend as he looked at where his creeping burns once were, all healed by this man wasting away. He isn't dying. That's what he told me, but he is dying as well, that's what he told me too. I don't understand either, honey. He is a mysterious creature with unknown ways far beyond our understanding, his current state as he called it is but a transition. What transition even? The one into non-existence or a coffin? Couldn't be more freaking cryptic for Iwa's sake. Pretty ironic now that I think about it, both are astronomically opposite yet similar in the worst of ways, Grace said, clutching his hand in equal worry. This was a very disconcerting sight to see such a being that held everything on his shoulder, their shield and protector, almost on the verge of death. In the corridor an enforcer warped in front of Liam and Iwa, placing a gauntlet hand on its back. They were warped again hundreds of meters away on the tech teleporter, then the enforced warped away again, its task finished. Those living biomachines could warp far at rapid intervals but not hundreds of kilometers far, at least not this model. Using the tech teleporter the couple teleported themselves to the other side of the moon on their private island. They were immediately greeted by a massive fidgeting great ostropede, 4 squirming and chirping tetrapterons, and a silent slinger behind trees. All of these creatures were observing Liam worriedly. They all could feel his pain, and if not for the fact they weren't authorized or trained they would have left the island tunneled right to him. I'm fine. It's just a little bit of pain, all will end soon and I will never feel it again. My ascension is close. Oh, so close. Everything will become better for all of us once I ascend, Liam said reassuringly as he scratched Gladius' chin affectionately, a clear sense of weakness within the motion that was felt by the massive frugivore. 108 Ascension. Below the house that was built on the island of the Heartsong was a strange cavern isolated from all by many shields and mechanisms blocking all possible connection toward Pandora and its biosphere. If even the tiniest of contact were to happen the entire structure would be warped on the icy moon, Neretsk Sepe. This cavern was spacious yet relatively small, barely having a dimension equal to a cube with all faces equal to a hectare worth of forest. Comparing it to a hollowed-out and oddly shaped spherical object would be more correct, but from the inside, it was very close in resemblance to a cave in its layout. A very alien cave at that. At first looked alive, fleshy in a way, and it gave a sense of utter wrongness that would befall the psyche of all who would gaze upon it. It could be compared to a living organism by the loose definition of the term. Growing from an organic-looking ground and ceiling of smooth metallic black stone were numerous stalagmites, and stalactites of varying size and shape made of wickedly sharp entwined thorny roots of the same material growing. Glowing blue and purple membranes held by this black metal could be seen adorning the arches the roots formed, but also the walls like living pulsating canvas, and from the ground yellowish mushroom-like structure grew, emitting a faint light. But the most peculiar aspect was a pond of light purple liquid at the center of it all, pure liquid element. From it, the entire cavern grew and rhythmically pulsed bluish-violet light like the blood within a creature's veins, and this to the cadence of a heartbeat. The owner of this heartbeat, Liam, suddenly appeared on an organic metallic platform in a flash of light. He walked past the smaller tech teleporter fused to the cave like a tumorous organ that brought him here from the outside. His massive frame in both size and bulk could not be hidden behind his tech armor as he advanced slowly within the element cave, his breathing pained beginning his helmet and labored. His steps were slow, shaky, and painful, accompanied by the metallic echoes from each, while he held a clenched hand over his chest where his heart was. He stopped walking once he reached the pond of liquid living metal, its eerie purple glow creating a light source far more important than any other within the cave. Placing a hand on one of the roots, he felt the dulled touch of his tech gauntlet from the surface and the inverse, both part of himself. It was akin to clasping hands together, but here none were truly part of his organic body. It was alien at first, but he rapidly acclimated to it. Fuck, does it hurt like a bitch? Liam thought the very last drops of his dark blood were leaking out of his body as he clenched his jaws to the point of self-harm due to the intense burning pain flaring in his heart that kept on growing and growing. Each of his heartbeats was agonizing beyond words. The blood flowing was reaching its end as the living metal that made this place had been replacing it permeated his system, increasing the pain as it spread to everything. And that wasn't the only thing to have been changed for Liam, it was only the last few steps of a long change that was going on since his appearance. His body had always been unstable, he was made to exist in a designed and constantly monitored environment. His never-ending growth spurred first and second his ongoing change that started at his engramic matrix, and has progressed outward and was finally going to reach its term. Breathing out, he tried to ignore the pain as much as possible. His implant glowed a bright orange, blue, and purple, then his armor twisted and warped away into the expanse of his inventory, revealing his naked form to the freezing highly radioactive air. The sudden disappearance of what was essentially his life support made him fall to one knee. He couldn't lift objects, walk, talk, drink, eat, or even breathe. Any that he would have been able to do was all but impossible in his current state. It was a horrible experience that mere words could barely describe. Still, his state of immense weakness did little to change his intimidating and terrifying appearance. The term human to describe him would only be for his general body shape, and even it would be the type of human that existed only under very specific conditions. 2 meters and 81 centimeters of height, 9 ft2, and pure sculpted and prominent muscles, flowing hair, beard, and overall body hair of pure energy filaments, 2 intense silvery orbs for eyes with an utterly alien mind that once was human working behind. A skin that was of 2 types, the one in the minority was of a light golden tan, and the other encroaching on the first, and in the majority was a translucent and of an intense light blue that only very few could even perceive as it obeyed on plane of reality most could not grasp. Everything behind it could be seen, from veins pulsing blue and violet, to slowly disappearing muscles, bones, and organs, as all turned into this exotic energy that slowly dispersed in the ambient air just like the normal skin was slowly freezing and burning on contact with the high radiation. By all accounts and modern understanding, Liam should be dead, and it wouldn't be such an incorrect observation, by the current scientific definition and criteria that is. And it would have been if not for the obelisks. It was just that his current state couldn't exist for an extended period in this plane of reality without support. Without it, he would have fizzled out of existence or lost everything and become the new tattered and twisted mind of the element. His body of energy dissipating in the air even with those 3 towers was due to the fact the transition had not ended, it was a leak more than anything. Gazing down at his heart through his closed to non-existent ribcage, Liam observed for a few brief seconds the rapidly disappearing organ, his heart, and how it finally stopped beating as it became an obsolete piece of flesh, like many of his other organs. The rhythmic heartbeat of the cavern stopped in its entirety. The feeling was beyond painful, it would be akin to a hypersensitive area being poured in hydrofluoric acid, while serrated needles were stabbed in it and salt mixed with jagged pieces of glass were added, then the entire area was deeply and slowly massaged to mix the whole. This was what was happening simultaneously on the entire side of his fleshy body, while the part of energy felt right, great beyond measure, and how it should be, like he had been shackled forever and never realized until now. His only positive thought was that it would be over soon, after this there would be no more pain. His eyes switched to his specimen implant, whose roots could be seen in their totality as they connected to what appeared to be both his equivalents to a vascular and nervous system. It was pulsing the same color as the cavern, the orange from the hologram deeming more and more to be replaced by a mix of those same two color signatures of the element. I can't stop the process any longer. Not like there ever was a going back, to begin with, he thought with resignation mixed with fear and excitement. It was a day he had prepared himself for more than a decade. He had built this entire area for this very day. It could be compared to a cocoon, or more precisely a chrysalis, since it was part of his body. He had started its construction on almost primal instinct. It just felt right and logical, and so that's what he did. It was far more complex than a cave grown out of element, far more in fact, and it was connected to the three obelisks. The potential that everything would be a trick of the living metal was ever present in his paranoid mind, but if he didn't ascend he would die, and if he was tricked he would die as well. He had plans if that were to happen, but ultimately Pandora would be at the mercy of the RDA, but also the Harvester without him, or any other threat, and that was simply unacceptable. This entire thing was beyond extreme, but Liam was fond of such methods. They tended to be very, very, very effective, with a pinch of softness to mellow it all out. It was such a philosophy he got where he was, and even before having been transmigrated, he was always described as rather intense, be it by friends, strangers, or family members. Family. I want to see how they are doing. Mom, Dad, and everyone else. Even if the Liam they knew is no more. Maybe I could potentially meet my own self here if his soul and mind can be grasped to see one of the paths my life would have gone. The post-human thought, wishfully bathing in the memories of his past, a far simpler time, but he wouldn't trade his present for the world to go back to it. As prepared on the technical aspect, he found it wasn't so much the case on the mental aspect of things. If the shaking of his ethereal blue hands were any indication, or it was the pain, or both, he couldn't truly tell with his current state of mind. He was both terrified and euphoric about what he was going through, but also far more emotions that had no meaning, a strange mix that was for sure. There was no going back, there wasn't one the moment his engrammic matrix was shifting toward this state of being. One of pure energy, at least on paper. He wasn't in the world of that video game, things here were improvised and on their test run. Sadly for the post-human, he did not have the gift of time to test them. He could but trust his own capacity to not have messed up. In any case, he was slightly delirious due to the fact his heart was gone and his brain was not all there anymore. In the literal sense of the terms, his brain was an organ like any other, just flesh. It was not spared by the ongoing change in the slightest. It was melting away, so to say. But such a loss for the current time was not even a problem. It was simply a biological processing unit in need of replacement. His real self was within the implant. Still, it had great impacts on his current mental faculty, but the soothing presence of his mate in his mind via their empathetic bond helped him keep him focused, even if his brain processing power was now rapidly dwindling to that of a human toddler. It also cut short most of his emotions, since they came for the most from the chemistry in his central nervous system, though it also reduced his pain greatly for the same reason. His diminished mental faculty and crippled body were not inconvenient either. Liam was aware it was going to be this way, and so he had planned for everything in advance. From the ceiling a turret burst out, its barrel firing a rectangular beam of blue light that hit him straight in the chest. Then he began to defy gravity and moved toward the middle of the liquid element, all while he wriggled without any control over his body, in both remnant of pain and the nerves firing up confused messages in his remaining human parts. From the purplish depth, tendril of tech grew and grasped him delicately by the ankle, wrist, and neck, stopping any movement as his body was held in a position similar to the Vitruvian man. Then the tendrils dragged inside the liquid element, his flesh melting and twisting at the contact. One tendril pierced his left wrist, and his fiery silvery balls that were his eyes became two small suns, and a silent scream of agony that outstripped another pain he had ever felt escape his mouth. Everything that was tech in nature reacted by their light, turning the most intense of silver all at once everywhere, no matter their distance to the point of origin. It was Liam's scream that spread through them. It didn't spread through sound waves, not any other that were to humanity. It spread at superluminal speed, affecting technology not of tech in nature, even up to Earth and far beyond, causing many disruptions. But the scream was also Shinik, affecting the one he was connected to the most. Iwa, the most affected of all, shared his pain and shielded his tames and all her children while she endured and soothed him. But it touched more than this. It spread outward, causing every human, from his sun miles in Hell's Gate, to Parker Selfridge aboard one of the ISV Venture stars, to even people in the Sol system causing them all to gaze at once to look to the epicenter, Liam. The hybrids of humans and NA6 were not spared either, Iwa protection protecting them only partially. Yet it didn't do much more than touch their psyches, attracting their attention and causing widespread confusion about the species itself. Some left far more affected than others to vastly varying degrees, some gaining very brief glimpses of what was happening. The reason for such a scream had been within Liam's calculation. He had made it all after all, and so the tendrils that were wriggling inside his left arm and entangling his specimen implant were all out of his machination. It was to move to his chest, the lack of normal organic matter making it smooth but no less painful, and it wasn't the only source of such pain. The specimen implant was shifting, metamorphosing into its final stage. It grew, elongated as the locks that kept the engrammic matrix within unlocked one after another for it to merge with the body and the element into one continuity. The specimen implant shape settled, the intense orange glow was replaced by soft blue and brilliant purple, and every leftover of once organic being evaporated. The scream ceased. The ethereal veins that had partially shifted to similar root-like structures of the cave but much more organic connecting to the implant in its new resting place. Then the heartbeat of the cave came back, lighting it in its entirety following the rhythm of the new non-existent heart, the core of the man of light that beat the same color to emit it as the energy was transferred to him until the last shackle broke and the surrounding world was bathed in a sea of blue light. 109 Homo Deus. Fingers of blue light pinched the heavily radioactive and freezing air of the cave, then blinding blue light that drowned it disappeared with this minute movement, sucked into a grape-sized ball within those fingers before being absorbed by them. The being from which those fingers belonged became fully visible in the dim cave of element. He was a naked human male made of pure blue energy, his body was muscular, each muscle group sculpted to perfection, his shoulders were wide and strong, his chest powerful and defined while his stature imposing beyond what should be possible. His mane of hair and wild beard of blue energy was unkempt yet in a perpetual flowing motion as if in water or being blown in slow motion by the wind. His ethereal skin of the same color was fully translucent, letting everything inside be seen, but there were no bones or any organs that might be found in humans. The only aspects that might remind even of a living organism with flesh and blood were the glowing and pulsing purple and blue nerve and vein-like structures that took the general root of those two organ systems but ultimately focused back to a point of origin that didn't correlate to both to exactitude. This point of origin was located in the middle of this man of light's chest. It was a comparatively small silvery lozenge with a smaller lozenge within that pulsed with both of these brilliant colors at the rhythm of the surrounding cave like a heartbeat. Then there were his eyes. The feature most distinct of all, they were two balls of pure fiery silver that were utterly alien to anything, be it humans or NA6, yet similar in more ways than one, enhancing this feeling of dissonance. These two orbs gazed far beyond what mortals could ever hope to fathom, nevertheless understand. So this is how it feels to be a Homo Deus, or what I can call a being of similar status. To be free of all shackles brought by my mortal shell, Liam said in his distinctively deep baritone voice that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. It was deep and multilayered and had a light echo to it, making it both delayed and yet not. He was experiencing many things at once, more than he ever did, and it was continuously increasing as he rapidly got accustomed to his new higher state of being, one that felt right and earned, all these pains paying off in the sweetest, most satisfying manner. He was feeling something akin to euphoria but far more intense, the emotions being deeper than what they would be from basic brain chemistry. There were no more limitations brought by the existence of his admittedly good organic processing power that was once his brain. It couldn't be put into words easily, but it was akin to having hundreds of him before pre-ascension working in tandems at full capacity and far above in proficiency. It was continuously increasing too, not at an accelerated pace, but it was. At the moment he was weak compared to what other mature members of his kind could be, but that was normal. He was just a baby and as such was fated to grow. Then there was his perception of reality, everything within the Alpha Centauri binary star system, where Pandora was located, to its last-minute detail could be glimpsed, studied, and comprehended on an existential level by him without needing a glance, and like the last point, it was extending slowly but surely. And that was only passively, promoting the presence of element, of himself, would increase its spread. That was what he instinctively understood, but that wasn't all. He could focus on certain points of the universe no matter how distant and gaze at it like looking through the most advanced of screens. His sight, or more accurately perception of the world, was not limited by the three dimensions of space humans could barely perceive with their weak sense and quantify with their primitive machines for what they truly were. Liam was gazing at space-time itself, and even more letting him see what was and what wasn't without any direct physical limitation. However, like a human could stare at the sun, he couldn't do so indigently and without strain. Perhaps the comparison to a baby having difficulty gazing at a bright light would be better since that was closer to what he presently was, but in the end, it was the same. It was only a phase, and like humans, he could have his own method of protection for this sight. The word homo in Homo Deus was there for a reason. Homo sapiens may not be anymore, but he was still part of the hominidae and wasn't going to change how they became the dominant species. Being a Homo Deus didn't make him omniscient, it wasn't a word to be used lightly, and Liam understood it fully. After all, words had meaning for reasons even to a being like him. Using them lightly was the greatest sin, like the boy who cried wolf. It will damage them until their worth became null, inevitably leading him or the ones he held important great harm. In any case, partial omniscience or not, his perception was not simply observing reality as is, but what shaped it, such as the fundamental forces. His gaze was close to all-seeing in that aspect, quite ironic considering what the Na6 called him. He could see what made reality, strands of impossibility weaving it into being, from subatomic particles to celestial bodies. It was a poetic language, a melody, or a painting, the very codes that made the universe what it was, its rules and history. It was beautiful, complex, and endearing, and Liam barely understood it, a problem that he was going to fix. The language used for tech was created from it. It wasn't a mere copy, though far from it, it was an adapted version of it, more of a still incomplete cheat code using elements shaped in certain ways within tech to interact with the original code. The goal, evident, was to change its tunes or what shade or whatever is desired to result in direct change in reality. It might sound powerful and almost divine because it was in more ways than one, but in its true essence, it wasn't so much different than a caveman who had learned to make fire with sparks from hitting rock together hard above dry plant matter. It was the same, yet it wasn't. It was just that the medium was different, giving an infinity of possibilities. It was one of the reasons why sapiens, meaning wise for Homo sapiens, had become deus, meaning God, for his new level of existence, even if Liam didn't agree and that it was an incorrect term to use, but he knew others won't see it this way without the alteration of the mind being used in some forms. Just like his mate Iwa wasn't a goddess but an eons old genderless Chinook hive mind, yet for the Na6 even if they would understand it didn't matter. It was a process that had already begun for Liam anyway. Humans and sapiens being in general to things like him was in a lot of cases very binary. All this new knowledge and understanding made Liam comprehend how deep his arrogance had been. He knew nothing before and still didn't. There was so much to learn. With this also came many insights that would drive the vast majority to true despair if they could comprehend it like he was and not just barely imagine it. The true reality that nothing mattered had never hit him this hard. It was an obvious truth, but none could truly grasp it like him and Iwa, as he came to learn. But this mattered none either, so what of it if everything didn't matter? There was no point in wasting the smallest amount of time upon it, and why need a reason to exist? Such pointless thoughts were born out of insecurities and a desperate wish to look for satisfactory answers that did not exist. Sometimes questions simply didn't have answers. Then there were his memories, everything in the highest of detail, from his time in the womb of his past mother to his childhood at the farm, his graduation from culinary school, the years he had lived here, and even fragmented memories that this body came from. With this came how he was here. And there was no definite answer, it was beyond his grasp and current understanding. It was the same two possibilities, either a random cosmic event or a random trans-dimensional eldritch abomination having fun. Either way, it didn't matter, it wasn't like his opinion on the matter would change things. Thought going to look for his point of entry light years away with the movement of the Milky Way might prove insightful to find how to potentially know where his original universe was and at the very least give data on universal travel. This is incredible, he mumbled, flexing his fingers one by one, then his limbs and body in general. There were no muscles, he shouldn't be able to move them, but he did. His body thrummed with a virtually infinite well of energy obeying his will, though it was more of a blob of elements he was instinctively shaping than a body in and of itself. He wasn't a material being anymore after all and had none of their limitations, which also means he lacked many of the pros that went with it. But it was a minor inconvenience compared to bigger ones like the largest that was solved already and why he had been so pressed to finish Project Obelisk. Those structures gave him a place to reside and a way to stabilize his presence in a regular three-dimensional space, even if that could be seen as essentially a partial 3D shadow of what he truly looked like. The Nexus will need express work and so will the obelisks. They are less than stable, and in 5 years fatal errors will happen. I knew there would be mistakes that flesh couldn't have seen no matter the time put into it, but to see how it's on the higher end of my estimation is disconcerting, was one of many of Liam's thoughts wired to the immediate problem to fix. His typical frowning habitude while in deep thought not having disappeared with the ascension, even if was having many more at the same time. Work he would need to do, and a lot of it. What he made while very impressive was hasty and faulty, it was only going to work without error for so long. He couldn't do one of the most impressive pieces of technology from a hyper-advanced civilization by himself in a bit more than a decade, even with limited knowledge of their technology. But since he knew his work was going to be defective in some form, he made it so it was easily fixable by someone smarter than him, this someone now being the him post-ascension, and he couldn't be more thankful for his past self's wise decisions. Enjoying your new self, hubby? The dreamy voice of Iwa suddenly reached his mind with a clarity and intensity never felt before. Smiling at her words, Liam gazed at where the avatar of the All-Mother was and reappeared right in front of her by means none bit him and she could understand. Like someone picking a jewel in a box from a 2D space without opening it, he could do something similar for a 3D one. Terrifying at first, but not as much as it sounded, since 3D objects were needed to effectively affect 3D space. It was far more complex, but that was essentially it. Verily, my love. More so now that I can fully hear and feel you without filters. Your voice and everything are truly beautiful, Liam said through their empathetic link, now an integral part of both of them, as he placed his forehead upon the one of her avatar, Shinik, making the interaction possible before they kissed. You as well. You are the most beautiful being I have ever had the chance to be in contact with, she answered, ending the kiss as she stared into his eyes, her pale pink iris glowing mesmerizingly with Shinik he was now able to see. It's not like either of us could see a lot truthfully, not that I put in doubt the veracity of either of our statements, he answered with a sly smile that earned a deadpan before both chuckled. It's time to grant a favor that is long overdue. As my first action, parting his head, he said, the one for which the favor was for not of this world anymore. The human that died while helping the chosen to be Torik Makto escape, she asked more rhetorically than anything, still curiosity lashed her voice. Yes, him, his action and sacrifice, while not an absolute necessity for our victory, were decisive in reducing the number of casualties and damage, Liam said matter-of-factly, uncaring how cold he sounded. We suppose my presence would be of help, she said, and as his approving hum she continued, let's give back what was taken from him, he is under your jurisdiction, we do not have problems with such action. And so what followed took under 2 days as the All-Father and All-Mother, and something that was nothing short of godly, both giving equally important parts. The All-Mother provided the soul, mind, and consciousness, for short the engrammic matrix of the individual that was to be reborn. She had kept everything safe like for all other humans that had died on her surface, even if the level of preservation varied vastly depending on how and where they died and if they were worthy. Though they were all to be given to her mate once the nexus was finalized for him to take care of. As for the All-Father, her mate that she was standing next to hovering lazily, he was gazing at what was held in levitation in a modified tech cloning chamber. It was a sleeping brown-skinned man of visibly Indian heritage kept in a standing position. He looked around to be in his early 30s and was very fit with clear muscle definition but also a healthy amount of body fat percentage. His only piece of clothing was a pure white pair of bulletproof boxers. 2 things stood out in the man's appearance, however. The first was a metallic lozenge the size of a fist with no remarkable feature that grew out in the middle of his chest, between the 2 pectoral muscles, and around where the thymus was in position. The second and most shocking of all, skin color, hair, ears, height, and many immutable features of his face-like nose shape were the carbon copy of a man who had died 13 years ago by an anti-personnel bullet to the neck. 110 respawn feature. This was a strange nightmare. Silver-eyed guy popping from nowhere and a bullet to my neck after having obeyed him, Max thought, his mind slowly awakening while a groan escaped his lips as he shyly opened his eyes before immediately closing them with the bright white light. Ark, stupid sunlight. I forgot to close the curtain again, and why is it so cold? Did I fall off of my bed? And where did my pajamas go? He internally rambled, insulting random naturally occurring phenomena and what he presumed but didn't assume was his fault. In any case, he needed to wake up. There were several checkups to do on the avatars and their pilots today. It was easy and routine, but it took a lot of time. More time than he would have liked, but that was life, and there was this new pilot, while amiable and pleasant to be around, was a bit of a pain around the edge for this kind of thing that required any level of stillness, which was darkly ironic considering Jake was paraplegic and movement wasn't his forte. Anyway, he yawned, feeling bones popping here and there as he stretched himself, fully surprised not his anything but also at other more unusual things. His body felt strangely energized, he felt lighter, his senses sharp noticeably, his sight was perfect, and his breathing clear. And he felt somewhat significantly stronger than he remembered. The same was true for his thoughts. They felt smooth and concise, but he was still sluggish. As he scratched his chest he froze. Something was wrong, something that shouldn't be here was here. It was small and metallic, and it was protruding from his chest, above the general location of his heart. It looked fused to his skin. Curious but not quite there on all levels, he opened his eyes with great effort, and as his eyesight adapted quickly to the light he stared dumbly at the smooth angular piece of metal growing off a chest he never remembered having. Then all sleepiness washed away from him, his pupils dilated to their maximum and he began hyperventilating, his eyes locked onto the piece of metal as he tried to scratch and took it out in vain. At the same time, he began to notice equally alarming details about his current situation that didn't help him calm down in the least. It was normal he felt cold and attacked by light. There was no bed, no comforter or curtain because he wasn't in his room, he wasn't wearing his pajamas but only a pair of white boxers, and he was held levitating meters above the ground stopping any tentative of movement, but most important of all, it wasn't his body. Well, it was, but it wasn't too, not helping him calm down. So he screamed, and screamed loudly he did, a scream that was high-pitched and filled with unfiltered dread as he couldn't understand what was happening, why was here, how was here, what had happened to him. What was the thing growing from his chest? Why did it feel like a part of his body? So many hows, whats, whys, and whens, and none with answers. All very valid questions appeared one after the other in this ever-rising vicious circle of panic brewing in his mind, flailing and screaming as much as he could but fuel for the fire. But all stopped in an instant, his body froze as an alien yet familiar deep voice echoed in his mind. Calm down, there is no reason to panic, you are not in danger and neither will be probed. Further, at those words with a hint of humor the mirage of a metallic lozenge flashed, and then millions of minuscule silver flakes exploded outward like a torrent that shifted and formed a humanoid body. Max stared unblinking at the formless silvery mass that shifted, squirmed, and writhed in the air. He was beyond terrified, his body exuding perspiration, heart hammering in his chest and primal, animalistic instincts screaming at him. The being taking form was above, superior to a point he would never comprehend. Then the silver flakes stopped moving in their place and the wavering figure of living metal stabilized into one finite shape. It was a man of inhuman height wearing a strange, alien-looking futuristic armor glowing blue that didn't hide the bulk of muscles behind. Though the helmet was absent, revealing a face Max was all too familiar with, one that implied that the pain of a bullet tearing through his neck had been very real and it wasn't a nightmare, making everything far more horrifying. It was Liam Cram, the human Grace had luckily noticed. It was unmistakable, and it was horrifying. A skin of a perfect golden tan, a long braided dark brown beard and hair and eyes, they were far more brilliant than he remembered, two silver iris glowing with power that didn't hide the uncanny valley effect burrow by the end of the alien intelligence residing behind a vaguely human facade that seemed to be done this way on purpose as if to constantly remind this being was in no point human. Welcome back to the world of the living, Max. How does it feel, any pain or discomfort? Liam asked, his lips moving while his voice seemed to come from all directions, creating a very off-putting feeling in the already unwell freshly reborn man. Max screamed again and Liam frowned slightly, leading to the scream gaining in intensity. It was expected that the RESP-on subject was going to not be in his best shape mentally speaking, and that was normal, but it still wasn't particularly pleasant. Snapping his fake fingers made of the Argent-C, the Homo Deus let gravity take its course on Max, and so the man fell toward the ground, giving a true reason to scream this time around, but at a microsecond before the impact he halted the fall. A bit of a rough treatment, but it worked like a charm in snapping him back without meddling with his mind or waiting for a quarter of an hour before he tore his throat by screaming. Liam thought, descending toward Max. In addition to him, 15 minutes was far, far longer than for a human. His perception of time in the flesh for 14 years has been far slower than everyone else, but the gap had never been this large as it was presently. Everyone but Iwa was just so very inextensively slow in everything. Quite ironic considering the laziest being here was very likely her. This was all real. Oh shit. I died. This can't be. It doesn't make sense. How? Why? Am I even Max? Max mumbled, most of his brain not dragged down by many of its parts that in normal humans would support what gave them personality and the like, but for him were refurbished into literally more brain power, since these parts that make him a distinct individual were located elsewhere. He slowly shifted his body until he was standing back against one of the pillars of the tech cloning chamber, staring at the lozenge poking from his chest and then at his hands, their skin blemishless, the many scars he remembered having due to various reasons now all but gone. This added another layer to the intense mental distress he was going through, all of it, not something surprising or uncalculated for by Liam. The type of things he wouldn't see coming would be orders of magnitude in the level of ridiculous that would equal Max suddenly turning into a yellow rubber ducky, and he had stats for that. And why not? After all, it was only a few equations done for fun and it was silly. He wasn't a dumb machine, and he amused himself when he could always be first on his to-do list. It was just Liam had never had any true opportunities to do so until now, and when he did it was with several layers of failsafe. Still, the Homo Deus crouched down while hovering and moved it in a Max was forced to look into his silver eyes. Eyes that were as real and living as they looked were all but fake sculptures and pretty light just like the rest of his current body, for the human wouldn't be able to understand what he would be seeing otherwise, and a translucent man of light was a far too intimidating of sight for an already catatonic individual. Though what was real and fake was just a matter of perception, strictly speaking, there was no real Liam as a single entity anymore. He had the gift of ubiquity and could exist in more than one place at once and work each with a different and complex line of thought, and all would be considered him. He didn't work linearly anymore. In addition, everything with element was his body. This puppet of argency shaped like his pre-ascension self was more like a finger or a hand for him to use and interact with the world. It was a fraction of what he truly was, however making something similar to Iwa's avatar was an ongoing project. Max, you are neither someone else nor a copy, it is the same you who spoke to me with grace through one of the drones I had snatched, it is the same man that let me enter the systems of Hell's Gate and stop a potential 1,000 of needless death. You are you and not a clone with the memory of a dead man like the soul drive, Liam gazing straight at Max's soul through his eyes. But my body, he tried to argue with what could be compared to an all-seeing god, and what he got was a chuckle and a light pat on the shoulder, filament of argency dripping down from it and weaving into reality a regular set of clothes that could be found for someone of the 21st century. A pair of blue jeans, black sneakers, and white shirt. The only thing standing out was the bizarre belt with the same aesthetic as Liam's armor and pretty much everything around, and he could feel a connection to it. Of course, Max panicked and was shocked by what happened, but compared to him being alive it was far down on the worry list. Now this is better, it will change nothing for me, but you must have felt uncomfortable. But back to the topic, in this case, yes. This body is not the one that you were initially born with. This one had died 13 years ago and has been buried at the root of a tree of souls. This body you see yourself in is a clone with no birth defect and in perfect health, a meat puppet for you to control. You see this metal piece in your chest, Liam said, pointing at the object in question and source of great distress to Max, whose head began calming down as rationality took the rein. Yes. And meat puppet? Max asked back, visibly disturbed by the implication but still not fully quite there, since there was a lot to process and it was only the beginning. The denial was still strong in him but slowly crumbling. It was something that couldn't be put into words but that Liam sympathized with, since it reminded him of his first few days after transmigration. This will come later. You see, this metal structure is what I call a specimen implant. It's a complex piece of technology that was grown like an organ and functions like one. Its purpose can be multiple, but this variant is only the basic version that has for function the storage and protection of your engrammic matrix, a term that encompasses what might be called the soul, consciousness, or any other synonym for what you are beyond your body, Liam said, letting his words be digested by Max as he wasn't finished. Your body is just an extension of the specimen implant to control. This is why I used the term meat puppet. You could die, fatally damage this body again, and transferring your engrammic matrix to a new one would result in you, forgive me the term, would lead you to respawn, as long as I will it and you deserve it, Liam let out rather casually, and for him it was, but that didn't mean the process was perfect or particularly simple. Quite the contrary, he lacked experience and the human engrammic matrix needed heavy editing to be put in an implant for it to work, for a lot of reasons that could be comparable to organ transplants and prosthetics. And as inhuman as it was, Max was just an unknowing test subject and source of much data, but not the main one. Many SECops had come before him during those few days Liam and Iwa worked on the first model of specimen implant. So it wasn't perfect, for once repeated death aside from the evident negative mental implication could cause the engrammic matrix to lose all cohesion and burst like a balloon, even if it's something that wasn't going to stay unfixable in the long run. Thought the mental scar would be kept or at least be of use, since death shouldn't be free of consequences for anyone no matter the circumstances. Making it a light matter based on something as flimsy as morals was a very bad idea, and something to focus on with his plan to make every human be the wearer of a specimen implant and rid the species of many of its inherent weaknesses for a functional society. Every detail could unpredictably shape the future in how he sees fit, self-centered as it may be. Liam cared little. This change won't be done without breaking a few eggs, though here it is more crimes against humanity of magnitude never seen before. This is a lot to take in at once, Liam. It feels like I'm going through an acid trip. Can we change subjects, please? You spoke about 13 years ago, what happened during that gap of time? Max almost pleaded as looked down to the ground searching for something that wasn't there. Well, quite a lot, but explaining in a summary without context won't help you understand. Though one thing that must be said before everything else is that the RDA is not a threat anymore. Their fleet that was sent has been hacked by yours truly and their leaders are in the phase of preparing their surrender, Liam said with a smirk that showed pearl white teeth, one that was unsettling like everything he did. It was just something that was, the uncanny feeling nerve disappeared and only seemed to increase. Before Max could respond however the Homo Deus snapped his fingers and both in a flash of blue disappeared teleporting several dozen meters above into a spacious living room with wide windows giving the view to a majestic garden cut into by a crystal clear stream and where it ended a beautiful tree of souls grew. The side aside the room while of gargantuan proportion was not empty, several people both humans and not that Max for the most part recognized were present chatting with one another and all stopped at his appearance. The closest to them a boy he didn't recognize taller than him and with a similar hairstyle to Liam stopped folding with a complex 3D hologram and looked up at him and waved with a pleasant smile but before the teenager could speak a voice, he had known for more than decades that was full of shock reached his ears. Max. Asterisk. I have begun to post a new fanfic, Archgenie of the Rings, Hoopa, Warhammer 40k. As the name suggests, it's about someone getting taken and turned into a weapon akin in shape and power to Hoopa, Pokemon, but in Warhammer within the War in Heaven. Creators' thoughts. The _BIP_BOOP 2003 The _BIP_BOOP 2003. Hello, the reaction. Bye bye. Comment. 11 comment. Vote. Chapter 111, 111. Power dynamics at play. The incoming message would be repeated every 3 hours for the next 12 hours. This message reached every ISV Venture star, the cold robotic voice of the artificial intelligence motherboard echoed, it reached every room and square centimeter of the 20 massive spacecraft without any delay attracting the attention of all. Good afternoon everyone, this is Charles Stringer speaking to you. Some may know me and some may not and for the majority who do not I'm the head administrator of the colony, I'm in charge of taking care of the mission's success but first of all your well-being. I am reaching out to you for the first time to inform you of our current status and how we will proceed. However before I begin I must give my felicitations to everyone for our safe travel and arrival in good health. The gentle, smooth, and calm voice of Charles followed with the appearance of his face on most holo screens, this time grasping the attention of everyone. Within a room filled with the most unique passengers aboard, they numbered 212 and were NA6 human hybrids that were vet grew during the travels from Earth to Pandora. They were known as recombinants, the product of the billions put behind Project Phoenix, and contrary to what the name suggested there was no resurrection involved however each of the 12 hybrids was implanted with the memories of long since dead mercenaries from which a part of their genes was. They were clones with preset memories, though if all understood it or even wanted to acknowledge it that was different. Or even cared to think about it for that matter, they weren't memories from the most philosophical and spiritual of people. As the voice caused their pointed ears to twitch each of them suddenly stopped fiddling with what was for them a new body that they weren't acclimated to, and the voice like thousands of others grabbed their attention leading to one of the two females of the group exclaiming, "So we finally know who is Selfridge 2.0 after a 5-day of being awake hey. He sure took his sweet time and it's not even face to face." Can't disagree with this statement right there Walker, one paper pusher for another all the same smooth talking and ass licking motherfucker. Let's hope he is less of a dim-witted manlet than the last, Quaritch said amusedly while his tail he still wasn't used to was moving as if it had a mind of its own. And it was amusing at first but it was rapidly getting annoying particularly when he stepped on it or he made things fall with his current poor spatial awareness. Speaking of, I heard from this cute technician that he was there and as a secretary at that. Should have probably deflated his ego a tiny bit, Winefleet said with a smirk at the thought of this infernal man obsessed with golf that ended with his human self getting hit several times by a badly aimed golf ball. There was a shared chuckle between the recombinants at this, all disliked the man to various degrees, and seeing him suffer was all but a plus for them, though unknown to them Selfridge was still far above any of them in terms of authority but it didn't say much since they weren't even considered as people by laws. The ones that had sold their memories didn't exactly care for how dangerous the condition would be for their future bluer clones. What I'm about to say is of utmost importance and will affect our collective mission for the greater good of humanity. At the words of Charles more than quite a few scoffed audibly or rolled their eyes, the recombinants in particular as they knew it was all crap and propaganda. But as long as violence was at the table none would complain. Though unknown to them it wasn't propaganda to rail the mass this time, well it was but there wasn't any express lie in what was said. Failing to have peace with Hell's Gate and starting a war with an unknown enemy of alien origin and superior technology would be catastrophic on the scale of humanity as a whole and could end in the extinction of the species. It wasn't even within Charles's authority or anyone abroad for that matter to speak of this and decide, This was why this speech wasn't even truly his. The supraliminal radio on board had been turned up to 100 for good reason, and even then it wasn't within the RDA authority to have such choices, but adding countries and other powerful individuals would turn a potential extinction event into an extinction event. It might be an overreaction, but it was the only one that was valid in the face of a visibly far more technologically advanced spacefaring civilization. It was an extreme situation that required extreme measures. Of course, not informing the authorities such as the United Nations of this situation was a crime that could make Marcus Leroy the CEO of the RDA and everyone here if it was discovered the most wanted men and women that humanity has ever seen. This even if it wouldn't be the first time the RDA had done crimes against humanity. They do it daily by simply existing, but it very well could be the one to tip over the overfilled glass. The RDA was powerful, but as expensive as their power was, they were not invincible or without weakness. Or without powerful enemies, or moles in their ranks, quite the opposite. Companies come and go after all, no matter how powerful and rich they are. It was why all those companies that thought this way fell or were bought. Marcus understood it and why he managed to play this dangerous game for more than a century and knew when to fold his deck and quit. This situation, if it turned for the worse, would be far more devastating than all world wars combined, and as much of a monster as he was, he didn't want humanity to perish, and he wasn't suicidal either, and in some form, it was an opportunity. And so Charles's words were calculated and not born of his own mind but from Marcus. General Hardmore and I have entered in contact with the ones in control of Hell's Gate. Our interests are in discord, but a peaceful interaction is a plausibility. The outcome of violence is one we must strive against. Our goal is not to wage wars against one another but to grant humanity its rightful place. Lessening the blood spilled in every camp is but one of my duties as the head administrator. There was a slight pause. I am speaking to inform you that diplomacy will begin between them and us. I will not speak of the intricacies involved in it, however. Outside of the confine of the ones who would participate in it, that is, this leads to my main point. Charles stopped like before for a few seconds to let his audience wonder what he was going to say. In 5 days an exploratory team will be sent to Pandora, its purpose multiple but focused on diplomacy. Said members have already been chosen and will be informed soon, but many more are lacking for this necessary but dangerous mission. I will not force anyone not under contract to come, this is your choice and yours only. But volunteering to come on this dangerous endeavor will see your boldness and bravery for humanity greatly rewarded in any form you may desire. The RDA will see them granted, be it to help your family on Earth or anywhere else. You have the words of Marcus Leroy and his words are true, and after this, Charles continued speaking of the various dangers but also how important this mission was. At the same time on Pandora, the ones that are currently being talked about to meet were together around a table eating a full-course meal of the most exquisite and beautiful food the Milky Way had ever seen. It was varied in all taste and texture yet fully melded together to perfection, even their temperature seemed to mix together. Calling this feast divine would be an understatement. Each piece of meat and other ingredients calculated to be here at the perfect seasoning, place, and orientation to their very last subatomic particle. It was made from the building block of reality to be perfect, the mathematics behind far more complex and advanced than any theorem humanity ever made. And Liam, the one who had cooked it, was both hating and loving it. His status as a homo deus made him unable to appreciate it, be it during its preparation or for consumption, yet it also let him create such fine pieces of art never seen with a flick of the wrist. It was bittersweet. He knew of its success from many sources, his inhuman senses letting him see the neurons of his guest interacting together and the various hormones produced with the more obvious evident aspects such as body language. He could read it all like an open book and even predict what they could do with a high percentage of success. They appeared all so simple. Series of mathematical equations for him to decipher, nothing was truly random and every cause and effect was calculable by him. They were just at the end automata with barely an understanding of what was and wasn't, and here he was playing with this lower life form, entertaining them like they were his pet, and in some way the relationship was comparable. Gaps in power, status, state of being, and intelligence. It was a strange change of view, strange but anticipated if ultimately rather depressing. He had forsaken most of his humanity a long time ago, but seeing how alien he was yet how he could fully understand them deeper than he ever did from his adopted son to Max, but also not at all since he was essentially reading data on a white page, was a unique feeling of relief and discontinuity. It is unpleasant, is it not? To understand them more than they ever will themselves, yet not, and to be aware of the gap between oneself and others that can never be crossed, forever separating them from you. The soothing voice of Iwo reached his mind, stopping his internal brooding. It is, I suppose, but maintaining contact to comprehend their importance even if they are specks of dust in the grand scheme of things is a necessity for my goal, and to keep the little of what I was for as little as it will last. Logic is not all there is, and only functioning by it is a pitfall to destruction. At the end you and I are just larger organisms with different views than them. And I owe them this much, he responded with equal measure. That we can agree. Solely working on logic would have resulted in a path we would not have preferred to tread upon, she said, hunching herself over slightly with her avatar over his artificial form made of the Argent Sea. Holy shit, this is good, Jake almost screamed, gorging himself on a drumstick only to get a slight elbow hit from Grace to snap back to reality even if her focus was on Max. There was a lot on her mind presently, like everyone else truly, from Liam's sudden shift from a dying husk to a hyperactive ever-present man after his supposed ascension to him having from his words RESP on Max, which was her true focus point. She couldn't believe it, but it was the truth, and the doubt that this man wasn't her decade-long friend but a clone with his copied memories was dashed away with a basic understanding of the technology behind it and faith in the Homo Deus from which she trusted with her life. Soul Drive didn't grant the memory after a point B in time if they were copied at point A in time, adding that they needed a living individual with a healthy brain to copy the memory, and if it weren't needed and Liam wanted to trick for whatever reason, it would have been done before. Cloning was not hard, and with the post-human intelligence even less so. Figuring out how to paste the memory was not an impossible fit either. And she had her consciousness switched from one body to the other, believing something could do something similar but in a way to reincarnate long since dead individuals, while ludicrous was very much in the realm of possibility. Then there was the RDA. They are coming in 5 days, Liam said as if answering her thoughts, the inhuman qualities of his voice stopping everyone dead in their tracks. The CEO of the RDA had opted for diplomacy. Not that it would change his fate, but I can at least say he is reasonably wise. They will fold under us either way, that I assure you. 5 days passed, and today was day 22 of the year 14 since Liam had been transmigrated by the Gregorian calendar on the 11th of February of the year 2168. Liam in his form without any subterfuge was floating within the upper layer of Pandora's atmosphere, the extreme conditions of such a place of no effect on him as his silvery fiery eyes observed something beyond. It was a space shuttle, one more advanced than the Valkyrie in many ways, but that didn't change. He had full control of the entire system. A faint smirk appeared on his ghostly blue face of energy at the thought of not shifting the shield away from where this vessel was going, but he still did. After all, he had accepted their demand to land on the moon and he kept to his words. If they didn't go up for the diplomacy route, then he would have let it happen, and it would have ended with the forces of the RDA exploding against a night undetectable veil of hardened light without him having to lift one ethereal finger. A baby would have more sense winning against a bear in a fist fight than the RDA penetrating his defense. You're pitiful, he said. He wasn't mocking them, however, only stating the truth, even if he found it rather amusing in this instance. More than he should for it to be considered healthy truthfully, but he had his ups and downs as well. And a megacorp that was driving humankind to an inevitable death, or his humankind as it would soon become, but also and mainly to his mate Iwa acting this way. Seeing it fold backward, and scamper to find a solution to avoid destruction before him out of sheer existential terror was as close to the epitome of entertainment as it could get. Particularly when it was useless in the end. Humankind to flourish will need cleaning at every level, like his mate. Artificial and controlled were the only ways for something to reach balance. Everything on Pandora was in harmony by nothing but her will. This situation, as amusing as it may be, didn't alter the fact that this submissive decision was the right one and in the best interest of all. Also, the RDA wasn't only composed of evil, corrupt people. This wasn't a cartoon, and things weren't black and white but of various shades of grey. Some were still fine pieces of work in need of a personalized hell, which was also a project for the Nexus. On the side of potential casualty, it didn't matter if he was able to reincarnate anyone by his fancy. He wouldn't cause unnecessary death and trauma. He had standards as flimsy, hypocritical, and contradictory as they may be. Closing his eyes, his body of light turned to flakes and disappeared in the wind to reappear right in front of Grace in Hell's Gate airfield, who was glaring at a dot in the sky that was none other than the space shuttle of his intrusive thought. Had one would have done like many birds have done against a pane of clear glass, but far more fiery. Fucking shit, Liam, were her words as she felt her heart almost jump out of her throat, but she ultimately smiled at her own expense. She was mentally far too old to be angry about such things. 112 Back on Pandora. Parker Selfridge was having a very bad week, or more precisely a very bad time in general, that had kept on spiraling downward since the moment he had been evicted from Pandora more than a decade ago. A time that for him was only a few months at best. With the cryo-hibernation as such, he didn't have the time to cool off and process it all. How his life had crumbled before his eyes while he stood powerlessly to the side and could smile and nod dumbly at everything while seething inside. For Selfridge's more personal aspect aside from touching his pride, this entire ordeal was a nightmare that kept on getting worse and worse. There were several causes for the present time. The first was barely an hour after his awakening. The hypothesis of an alien presence outside of the scope of Pandora's natural biosphere was confirmed by huge artifacts of unknown purpose, nevertheless material, but their placement in some of the most powerful magnetic fields of the moon at equidistant from the others was a clear sign those three towers weren't here to be pretty. This led to the logical conclusion that whatever this alien presence calling himself Liam Cram was, he was at least one severely more advanced than humanity in many domains if not in everything. After that came the educated guess that this being could be but a fraction of a possible spacefaring civilization with this technological level of unknown range and all the danger that comes with it. It wasn't a movie with the alien being excessively mentally retarded and humanity somehow being their only weakness and winning because the plot wanted it so. It very much wasn't, and Selfridge could say at that point he was relieved all understood this. The second, and proof that they had no fighting chance, was that every system on board had been thoroughly hacked, modified at every level to be then taken over to an absolute degree by this alien. Their spaceship and every bit of technology using a form of computing became something that wasn't theirs anymore. As such, this situation became critical mere seconds after the discovery of this new alien life. Luckily it was only this, and the alien individual controlling the fleet of ISV Venture Star didn't seem explicitly malicious. It was more akin to someone seeing and tolerating an interesting wild animal in their backyard. With that in mind, it didn't change that he could have had the idea to turn off the life support systems. Or worse, it was simply terrifying, as everything from the best to the worst was equally possible to happen, and human nature made it so the negative always came first and stood out. But it didn't change how utterly powerless he, and for that matter everyone else, was, even if most were unaware of it. Space had never been so terrifying. You can't run, can't scream, and your death is inevitable, and no one would know if the alien deemed it so. Vegetables on a chopping board, that was what they were. No one would know back on Earth as well. Faking voice and image had been in vogue for close to 2 centuries and beyond, and an alien with advanced technology being foreign to these concepts was a ludicrous notion at best. Frankly, they were as good as dead if they did something that would displease this Liam Cram even a tiny bit. The tension was very high. They couldn't even flee on the mechanical part of things even if they weren't hacked. The motors for the ISV Venture Star to begin their acceleration or deceleration ran on matter-antimatter explosion, and it generated an immense amount of heat that needed to cool down for being used safely again, and this process took months and it hadn't finished to cool down. Humanity was spacefaring, but only truly in the range of a single star system, the Sol system, beyond, and it became complicated without a more effective method of interstellar travel. Then there was the third point, and why he was feeling utterly terrified and wanted to just fall unconscious and never wake up, or just die. He had been chosen to be the diplomat of the expeditionary mission. Without his consent evidently, not that he had any right to refuse as it was in his contract. But by all means it was a logical choice, one he would have encouraged if that wasn't him being thrown at the wolves, and hypocritical as it was human nature. He had been chosen for good reason. He was the most familiar with Pandora and the ones that remained at Hell's Gate, and also disposable yet still loyal. It was a strange situation he made himself fall into. One good thing, if that could be considered as such, is that he was the de facto leader of the expedition on terrain. It didn't change he was unwell and wanted to go anywhere else though. And he wasn't a lone case of being deeply affected by being in this mission. The civilians who volunteered and then were chosen for their background, competence, and mind after severe testing were for the most part calmer but not less stressed. But also far more determined. It wasn't about them. It wasn't truly to begin with, as the test got rid of the most selfish kinds, but this was far greater than they ever imagined in both scales and importance. Climate crisis, pollution, overpopulation, and war are all background noise barely worth a second of their attention in comparison. Then there are the augmented SECOPs. Automaton of flesh and augment, he thought, gazing briefly at one of the 6 tall black armored figures standing around him like statues, their helmets turning the task to identify them impossible. Francis gave him the authority over this little squad to a large degree. They were his personal guards in a way, but truthfully more here to be pretty and reassure him than anything, since he doubted they were exempt from having been hacked. One of the greatest defects of cybernetic implants, what possesses codes and is connected can be hacked no matter what. And finally the third type of passenger present, the squad of recombinant, like the SECOPs had control over them, but it was quite different. It wasn't through loyalty but by the fact he could kill them with a press of a button that would detonate a charge of oxygen in their central nexus. Though none knew that to this extent and would follow his words more out of willingness, the off button wasn't the only thing to stop them. they were pure GMOs and there was a lot of method to control such creatures by manipulating their genes and also memories pasted from the soul drives. I hope Quaritch 2.0 and his squad of psychic shitheads don't fuck it all up, he thought, feeling the shaking of the space shuttle re-entry in the atmosphere. Why did Charles nevertheless Marcus even want these barbaric animals here? Or it wasn't either of them. Who cares, it's past the point of second guessing. It won't be like I would have the time to regret it if it turns to shit. Minutes flew by as the shuttle descended, and at some point, the pilots lost control of the vehicle, but their panic was short-lived since it was within the protocol, and so the vehicle controlled by an unknown force landed in the airfield of a very bizarre place that was marked as Hell's Gate on the map. We have landed, follow your given instruction, I repeat, follow your given instruction no matter what. This is a mission of utmost importance and our success will affect the fate of everything we hold dear, Selfridge said through his microphone before walking toward the exit, an exopack already over his face for him to breathe the air toxic to humans of the moon. Stopping meters before a grey featureless metal wall, he sighed deeply, his tense expression softened to an amiable smile and his taut body relaxed into a posture of control and calm, but neither of arrogance nor laziness. A stark contrast to him a second ago that had the one's close blink in confusion. Open, he asked motherboard, and half a second later the click of metal locks opening was heard with the air pressurizing, and the slipped metal wall he was in front of revealed to be but a rampant that slowly opened downward for him to walk on. And that is exactly what he did. Walking out first and before all without any guard, body armor, or weapon, only a nice sky blue three-piece suit and his immense distress hidden by a carefully crafted mask of lies. A mask that broke in but a second as he walked down the ramp, and a humanoid creature that manifested in front of him in a flash of silvery light, a being that was equal in size to NA6 and of exact appearance to the hologram from the day of his awakening. One he could never forget. Dark brown hair and beard neatly braided with multiple points that looked like pearls, a golden tan on a masculine face, and two silvery iris that seemed to see far beyond the realm of mortal. This was the eyes of the man captured in video 13 years ago. The relation had been drawn already that the two were, but now he was convinced this was the same creature. Welcome back to Pandora, Parker Selfridge, I hope your stay will be pleasant. I'm Liam Cram, the one that had contacted your little crew and led your company away from my mate, the human-like alien said, amused in a deep baritone voice coming from everywhere at once like the echoes of the winds in a cave, his iris for the briefest of moment turning to two fiery balls of silver. Holy shit! Holy shit! Holy shit! Holy shit! Holy shit! Holy shit! Were the current thoughts repeating in Selfridge's mind like a broken record, as his face paled, eyes dilated, heartbeat increased. His body was screaming at him with instinct he never knew he had, that this thing was a higher existence as little as it made sense to him. This didn't go unnoticed and the SEC ops flinched, the hands on their weapons tightening as if a fight was imminent. The creature calling himself Liam only smiled, it was inhumanly white and very amused, as if he had been told the funniest of jokes. Adorable, all of you, truly. Though weapons, firearms in particular, without the merit and necessary credence are forbidden under my authority. What I'm about to do next might tickle for a few seconds, Liam said, silvery eyes bright like two miniature suns as he snapped his finger, and from both of his palms string of tiny silvery hexagonal flakes flew and commented to each of the stunned SEC ops chests before any could react. The tendril of argency exploded outward like cocoons, swallowing them whole. Then the second after 6 smaller figures of varying sex and ages stood in confusion and horror as their armor and weapons were recycled and turned into regular clothes and exopack for them to breathe. Wah! Quaritch behind couldn't finish that. He and his squad became the next target of the silvery tide. The thread of metal particles flew through the space shuttle and hit all of them simultaneously. The recombinants didn't accept it. Some screamed, some fought back, some did both and more, but it was useless, for everything from firearms to blades and even blunt weapons were turned to air in the most literal senses of the words. Many of the civilians were not spared either, as it had a mind of its own. The tendrils split and targeted everything even remotely considerable to be a weapon. For them, however, the weapons were simply taken and in exchange, colored and animal-shaped candies were given. But for some odd reason that was deeply disturbing and unsettling was that the candies of each person were their respective favorite color, flavor, and animal. Panic exploded everywhere, and it only grew as the tendrils shifted and moved, grasping everyone and everything from hurting each other in a complex net of flowing metal. Then each felt a soft prickling sensation at their nape, like a needle injecting a vaccine in their bloodstream. The argency at the molecular level evolved and multiplied in their body, passing through cells and grasping proteins to tinker with them, changing the brain chemistry of everyone to forcefully calm them down, bringing rationality back. However, it wasn't the only thing that was being done to them. Innocent you may be, but that is a necessity for you to go through. Humans cannot live the way they did for the past millennia, they advance too fast for their biology and mentality to keep up. The Homo Deus spoke internally, not lying to himself about what he was doing was far from the best interest of anyone right here. His mind was on the species as a whole and how it operated than the individual, not even his loved ones. He needed to build an artificial environment and then create the creatures to live within to get to something as close to perfection as possible. It was exactly how Iwa proceeded and why the biosphere of the moon was odd and many things didn't make sense from a purely scientific point of view. It was his mate's garden and she took care of the way she saw fit. Evolution was present but only the way it needed to be. Balance, prosperity, and stability at such scales for such a long period of time can only be attained artificially and with strict restrictions on what is and isn't forbidden. But that's something no mortals could ever hope to do. Good things neither Liam nor Iwa were in this case for their current position, that is, everything is mortal depending on the point of view. What did you do? Selfridge asked terrified right after he had been stung at his nape by the Argent Sea, his body covered in sweat out of instinctual dread he felt being in such a proximity to this. God, yes God, that was the only explanation for what things were done, it wasn't simply technology. Altered a few hormones so that you stay relatively tame. Oh, and there won't be a need for diplomacy, your fate is sealed and calculated, Liam said, snapping his finger causing space to distort with a clack of the air. A four-legged creature of metal appeared, but the enforcer wasn't of any importance compared to the three people that had been brought. Are you all right, Parker? You seem a bit sickly, unwell, dare I say, even if you didn't age one bit. Has life been good to you, dear old friend? A tall avatar woman said with a sneer, bunching forward to be able to stare in his eyes with her ember almond-shaped one, her voice, and face ones that Selfridge recognized instantly. Grace Augustine, he mumbled like an idiot. He was out of his depth and couldn't process a lot of things. If Grace didn't know who this man was she would have almost felt pity, but sadly for him, she knew, and he was one of the worst humans alive. The fact he thought of himself as not one of the worst not gaining any good point on her. Ding ding ding. We have a winner, Grace said with fake joy and surprise, but her focus instantly snapped to one of the recombinants slowly walking out and she hissed with her ears shifting down in for her a rare show of aggression, Quaritch. Grace, it's not him. Your emotions are wasted on a dead man, and is he even worth your energy? If this clone messes up then he is all yours, but right now. It's not ideal, Max said softly to his friend, which worked somewhat as the avatar's body language shifted to something less aggressive but still alert. What? Oh, how are you? Selfridge mumbled, gazing at the man he showed having his neck blasted off. There were major differences such as athleticism, lack of glasses, and the glow on his chest, but other than that this man was the same as Max Patel. It's him, here magic and technology are but one, and the same, Catherine he recognized said, now a woman in her early 50s with graying red hair, her face lacking however any kind of visible aging and her voice sharp and energetic. There was also a realization that none of the two humans were wearing any kind of life support device to breathe and live, but with everything else that was a minor concern if one at all. Now that the reunion is over, let's dig into the main course, Liam said, interrupting his thoughts with a soft but loud clap of his hand. 113 Day of Surprises. Nearly 4 months had passed since the expeditionary team composed of 6 SECOPs, 13 recombinants, and 26 civilians then Parker Selfridge had landed on Pandora and had arrived at Hell's Gate. There had been no true diplomacy, it was pointless, it was used when two parties were roughly equal, or under specific reasons that made the situation turn for the worse for both parties, which was neither the case. Liam wasn't going to try and be reasonable at any true length and consider the other party's interest. And why would he even do so? His goals were not going to become reality without the blood of billions. As such he had forcefully absorbed the weaker party by various means, all violating human rights. Not that they weren't violated daily, but there had been no violence in any true sense of the words here. And what frivolous concepts those rights were, even freedom, those concepts could not exist to their fullest in any civilized society, so it was better to get rid of them like most of everything else with humanity. Leading to why Liam will have to cause the death of billions, even if death was not the end here, making human life cheaper for him than it ever was. However, the problem wasn't the concept of human rights but their maker and the way they were put into motion, if at all, with their inconsistencies. And how vague they were as well. A problem also born of how human society was built, from country, religions, and cultures as a whole. It was made badly because it came naturally from several thousand years of conflicting interest. For the betterment of the species and not a quantum of the world population, leading to the latter downfall. It will need without exception to be washed away and marked as faulty and to never repeat. You can't fix the unfixable after all. This aside, acclimation for the civilians was the one that was the most important and went the smoothest with the least amount of intervention from Liam, but for the others it went well too. Getting them jobs for their respective competence but also composition and making them part of the leaderboard was done quickly and efficiently. Adding more of them from the ISV Venture Star in a slow trickle had not caused any problem either. The urgency in their system calming them down here and there or making them focus on other aspects of life was of great help too. They were like scared cavemen, and if they turned into a blubbering mess of nonsense at basic teleportation, then that was no good, considering teleportation was not the most magical thing that tech could do. Manipulating space was one of its more common functions behind hard light and energy manipulation in general. The meritocracy with more or less friendly competition and a common goal aided as well, but also how violent, unbiased, and extreme the punishments were if anyone thought themselves smarter than the Homo Deus by trying to find non-existent loopholes. Did you voluntarily sabotage your colleague by various but discreet means that only you would know since they aren't directly harmful? Then you have failed and can kiss goodbye to your privilege as a member of society, and depending on how grievous the crime was with a myriad of factors, the punishment could go very far, death being far better than potentially heavier sentences. Personhood could be lost on a fundamental level, and emotions were not exempt from it either. Nothing was safe once the rules were broken, absolutely nothing. What appeared to be reality was just an illusion for the All-Father to shatter and manipulate. It didn't matter if you were the best, to begin with, punishment would come if you failed to follow the two rules that assured the good, success, and joy of. It will do no matter what. His gaze was all-seeing, he could glimpse within the mind and soul, there was no hiding before his judgment. A meritocracy that promoted aggression against its own members for progress was not a meritocracy but a festering abomination, a pungent failure filled with lies, fear, and hate that would end in war, and death. A step backward for the worse. It needed strict rules and solid structures only absolute authority gave, the fragile unrealistic morality of short-sighted mortals be damned. One of the recombinants made with part of Zdarsik or Z-Dog for short and her memories associated with it had suffered the punishment and will not be seen for the coming century physically, mentally it would be far worse, she had played and lost badly. Play of words and charisma to defend yourself against a nigh-omniscient being was not the best of ideas, even less so when what you are trying to defend yourself from was attempted sexual assault on a man under said nigh-omniscient being protection. It sharply calmed down the more aggressive recombinants, since like all punishment nothing was censored. Absolutely nothing, even from children, particularly from children. Though they had the freedom to listen and believe what they wanted, it wouldn't change factual reality. That was if the rules were broken otherwise. This was heaven, food, entertainment, and beyond all safety. As long as someone was a functioning member of the collective, nothing would end badly for them. Unnatural death with diseases or accidents was not even a concern. Though there were levels of advantage on how much inherent merit someone brought on the balance, advantage encompassing things like lifespan increments, but even then in no case did it spare them from punishment if action taken with malicious intention against a member or the collective itself was taken. In fact, the higher the power, the bigger the consequences for such action for the most part. In this case, the saying about great power and great responsibilities tied themselves together. On the 5th floor of the Hubmod of Hell's Gate was walking within corridor a tall and athletic teenager in a highly advanced bodysuit. Hovering behind him was an otter-like creature of flesh and metal. He was frowning ever so slightly, a quirk inherited by mimicry of his adopted father. "Oh, good morning, Miles. Quite unusual to see you round those parts of the base anymore," a woman in her 40s said to the teenager in surprise as she walked out of her apartment. It had been some time, but she recognized him just as she was one of his teachers at the community school and had taught him there when he was younger. "Hi Elena, yet. I don't have the time and the gazes are unpleasant. I don't like this place for the same reason. Prefer the freedom outside," Miles said stiffly, referring to how with whom he was the protege he attracted a lot of attention, mostly jealousy from adults and others around his age. "Suppose it makes sense, but that's life. On another note, I suppose you are looking for someone. I don't see anything that might interest you." "One of the recombinants, if I were to take a guess, or a special someone?" Elena asked, closing the door behind her as she looked up slightly to meet the gaze of the tall teenager. "The former," he said rather hastily, the second option surprising him in a way he didn't like as he felt his cheek heat up and it earned a chuckle from the middle-aged woman. "Just teasing you, Miles, your eyes are on someone else I know and she doesn't live here. As for them, I don't know where they are right, but where they most likely should be. Their dormitory. You go straight until the blue plant, then right, continue to the 3rd corridor and go to the one left. He is gone," she sighed in exasperation, having lost the teen from sight. Well, at least he didn't seem to have changed his habit of vanishing from her eyes the moment she looked away when he was a child. Back to Miles, he was speed walking through the corridor following the path Elena had given, but not by having registered her words. He was following Cupla's instruction through a hidden miniature headset close to his eardrum. In short minutes he walked close to a third of a kilometer's worth of steps to stop at a very tall door, inhumanly so in fact, with a name tag that wrote Quaritch with nothing before or after. Simply Quaritch the recombinant, and the one he was going to meet for the first time. Let's see how the copied memories of my sperm donor are in another, Miles thought, knocking on the door before waiting a good half a minute, from which he heard, thanks to Cupla again, the scream and noise of someone hastily dressing themselves, though it was two voices, one distinctively feminine. Frowning as he was about to open the door by using his higher authority, it brusquely slid open, revealing a small disheveled woman barely dressed properly with a drunken smile, as she barely acknowledged him and moved away, limping, and not a small one. Though it wasn't one born of an injury, which reduced the possibilities by a large amount. "Hey," he muttered dumbly at the sight, understanding dawning on him in seconds. Then there was the one he was looking for, only in a pair of boxers, an exo-pack on his face for him to breathe. "What do you want, boy?" the recombinant said, a mix of annoyance and amusement at the bemused kid who awakened him in a less than respectable position. "How?" Miles asked incredulously, but the only answer he got was from the human NA6 hybrid, rapidly putting on a pair of pants and a t-shirt. "A bath will be needed too, it seemed. Talent, patience, control, and preparation. Now who are you and what do you want, so this conversation goes somewhere, or you can, scram off," Quaritch said, this time paying more attention to the teenager in front of him, and couldn't but note several glaring details: the bodysuit of tech, the body type showing heavy but controlled training, the cyborg creature behind glaring at his soul, which he found amusing, and the face of the boy himself, which made him pause. It was familiar in strange ways. This can't be, he thought, recalling the very last few months he had available from before the soul drive was used. The face, the eyes, the hair, it reminded him of her, and the mistake that couldn't be fixed as detected far too late, and that he, no, the other he had been too hesitant to. "My name is Miles Cram, or at least that is the present and until I die and beyond, but on my birth record there are Socorro and Quaritch, my biological parents. I'm a war orphan," Miles said calmly, studying with rapt attention the rapidly shifting face of the recombinant. "But, I reassure you, I'm perfectly aware that you are not my father. That would be beyond insulting to my real father. I just want to have a general idea of what the man who gave half of my present genetic material was in person. Records, reports, and word of mouth are not everything after all," the teenager said matter-of-factly, with mere curiosity, and surprisingly, it felt very unpleasant to hear for Quaritch. And he was stumped, his brain trying and failing to find the words. The questions coming out of nowhere were brutal, lacking in tact, and were said in a way he found unnerving. The way it was said was almost mechanical, and it was honestly disturbing. The subject was about not helping with how it was placed here, the softness of a jackhammer against concrete, and the delicateness of a grenade. "Fucking shit, that's just a kid, calm yourself down. It's just the morning. Last night was good and this is just a kid. Well, the kid that I supposedly share blood with," he thought, collecting himself back together. He understood as much, that they weren't in any way related aside from DNA from the same man, they were more brother or cousin than anything else, and he would be the younger in the equation too. But he had the memories of this dead man, and they affected him, even if he and Miles had no tie aside from this strand of DNA, but emotion did not mix well with logic, and it dictated that the situation be awkward. For him, that is, the kid that should be around 14 to 15 seemed far too casual, with it adding a new layer to the already uncanny feeling present in the air. And he said cram. He suddenly had an epiphany, making the situation far graver than before and actually making him fearful. With the speech pattern, bodysuit, and strange cyborg otter behind it, didn't take a genius to realize this brat was important, very, very important. This kid was the adopted son of a god. One misstep and that was game over, at least that's how he immediately saw it. "That's a lot to take in at once." 5 minutes after waking up, Quaritch said, not finding any other more appropriate words to say at this moment. He didn't know how to react, and he wanted to be sure there was even a right way to do so. Though one thing could be said: why? Why now, after months I've been here? Why not? It seems to be the correct time to do so. You have settled and have adapted to this new life. However, before he could finish, the world shook, and the sound of thunder echoed from deep below the bowel of Pandora, the tectonic plates below violently shifting, causing him and Quaritch to stumble, trinkets to fells and furniture to moves, and it was but one of many. But that was only the part of a greater whole. The world outside the windows had turned dark, as if night had fallen or a solar eclipse had happened. However, this wasn't the one caused by Polyphemus. No, this was something else. As the two advanced to gain a better view, their eyes widened at the sight, one of confusion and terror while the other of recognition. circular with sharp points forming a disk of dark grey organic-like alien structure glowing a toxic green of impossible size encompassed the sky as it was slamming against the blue-white hexagonal pattern of the world barrier. The calm deep voice of Liam echoed through every device harmoniously snapping both of them to reality. However, a hint of anger could be detected and it was bone-chilling to all. Code red, this is not an exercise, I repeat this is not an exercise. Do not panic, follow the rules and move calmly and toward your closest designated vault to wait. Any and all actions infringing on my rules shall be punished accordingly after this event has passed. An explanation shall be given once all individuals present in Hell's Gate have been secured. And the message seemingly overpowering the deafening thunders of the sudden powerful seismic activities continued, the one speaking of further instruction on how to proceed against this crisis of which many at this instant in Hell's Gate only thought of a nasty natural disaster even with the code red that had for purpose indicating an attack to annihilate them. They were greatly confused.
Thanks for listening.